1:30. Alrighty, let's begin. Call to order a special council meeting for the city of Bella Vista. We have one item on the agenda regarding STRs and by extension septic. To kick it off, Cassie has been working with the Arkansas Department of Health and Taylor on putting together a citywide septic information package. So I've asked her just to come and give us an overview so we know where we are and what's left to do.
Sure. So Taylor is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to all this information, so she's been providing me everything that I need. And we have put information on the website so far in a few different places that are easily found by people looking for them. We're working on scheduling some social campaigns to run through the month of September to kind of put septic information in your face, whether you want it or not, because a lot of people don't realize that they don't know the stuff that they don't know about it. So we're gonna come up with a schedule and make it kind of in an order that fits some other things that we're doing that will ultimately lead to the community event that CDS is planning in October, which will be open to anyone who wants to come and have a variety of speakers from water quality to septic systems to state laws, stuff like that. And then if that is popular and depending on if there's a further need for that, Taylor and I have talked about doing additional events following that because, you know, it's impossible for people to make just one scheduled event. So it'd be nice to be able to do that again if it's something that they would like to attend. I have talked to Brandon at Discover Bella Vista. He said they're going to be doing a mailing soon to the rental home owners regarding a pay system that they're updating, I suppose, Doug. And he's going to provide some information that I'm going to give to him to include in that also. So hopefully the majority of the rental homeowners will get some information also that we can provide to them.
Septic,
Yes.
good practices
Yes.
type stuff.
Yeah. So if there's other places that you want information put out, or if there's specific information that you guys want to request, I am happy to include that and do my best to get it anywhere we can.
I think one of the things that would be great to, you guys have probably thought about it, but if not, some kind of maybe annual reminder. Maybe we do it during daylight savings, the end of daylight savings or something like that. It just says, don't forget, if you haven't pumped your tank in the last 5 to 7 years, you might ought to have it checked. You know, just kind of a reminder. On my septic system in my yard, I've got a diverter valve. So I have multiple different lateral lines, and I'm supposed to be switching that valve every 6 months, if I remember. I don't. So I think any of that stuff is kind of creating awareness, and it's an ongoing communication program that way, not just a one-time, we'll try to get the word out and then hope for the best from that point forward.
Well, and with the population growing as much as it is here, I mean, you can put out all this information and just flood it out. And then a year from now, there's so many people living here that have not seen that.
True.
So it's just something you have to repeatedly do every few years.
You might think as you're going through the collateral, what are the ones that could be on an annual refresh cycle for communication?
Yeah, it's a good idea.
How would you push that out now? Did you direct mail or?
We don't typically do direct mailers just because they're pretty costly, but you know, we have a lot of luck with social media. We have a lot of our residents are in the demographic that prefer to use Facebook, and that's where they get their information. So Facebook is pretty helpful for us. But we also use Instagram, which typically catches the younger generations, and Twitter is not so much what we use to reach the residents, but if we have something newsworthy, usually Twitter is where it's picked up. So.
What happened with the POA and some kind of an insert in their mailing?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because I forgot to mention that too. The POA is really good about including in their emails that go out, because they have all kinds of regular emails that go out. Any kind of blurb that I send them, so I'll be sure to send them information. And then we also contribute monthly to their Connections water newsletter. And I've actually already scheduled those all out and sent them over because of the yard waste stuff that we're doing. But I will have to see what I can add in addition to that to go along with this septic information that we'll push out.
Good. Thank you.
One thing about anything going out from the A&P Commission, which we do have the ability to do now. So 462 short-term rentals have been identified today. We have addresses, specific addresses for 400 of those. They identify them, and then they have to do the research, to get the addresses, to get the owners, to get the parcel numbers and things like that. So that should catch up. I don't know how many the short-term rentals will be left without specific addresses at some point, but Granicus is still going through the process. So when we very first began this with Granicus, I don't know, I'm just going to say in the neighborhood of 350. Well, that's not too bad. That's not what we thought, right? But they obviously had to go through the process moving forward to continue to identify the short-term rentals. So they're still really kind of going through that. What the top-end number is going to be at the end of the day, don't really know right now. I don't know when we're going to see a leveling off.
Yeah.
So that's just something, we got about 60 that we don't have specific addresses for.
That's still quite a bit, though, that we can reach.
Oh, yeah,
which is
for sure. I'll just
helpful
let you
to
know
have.
there is a gap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that program is really important as we've kind of tried to peel this onion a little bit, and we understand our septic systems, if they're maintained correctly, they can last a very long time, but they have to be maintained correctly. And I think our concern is certainly far greater than just the 3% of the Bella Vista residents that are short-term rentals.
Right.
It really applies to all of
Everybody.
us. Yeah, and I think the more that we can do to educate and communicate to those, I think we're doing the right thing. We're being responsible as a city government. So
Agreed.
thank you for your efforts
Sure.
in that direction.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Cassie.
Yep.
Okay, I handed out to each of you, well, I put it on the desk. This is bullet points from the folks who spoke last night. Larry, I'm not sure, I don't think you were here when I handed it out. Thanks. There was also a gentleman who spoke in favor of no regulations and letting the market work its way through. But all the others were in favor of regulation of some form. Something that I would ask you to consider as well, two things actually, is we've had some people who have said, look, I'm renting one bedroom for two people in my house, and I live in the house, and I use it to supplement my income. We may want to exclude them from being counted as an STR. It might be wise to still have them go through an inspection process, for decks and that kind of thing, but it's something for your consideration.
Mayor,
Yep.
relative to that, it might suggest that we consider it as a boarding house situation and label it as such, where you have an owner-occupant renting out, whether it's a bedroom or a lower level or upper level, self-contained. It might be appropriate to use that terminology.
Okay, fair enough.
Well, we have a use in our zoning code called bed and breakfast. And so Taylor, I'm putting you on the spot. I don't mean to. If you can't respond right now, you can get back. But how are you seeing bed and breakfast distinguished from these STRs as we define them here?
So I gave some little handouts of our current existing code to the city councilman about that specifically. Just as a land use reminder from planning that we have land use in code that's similar to short-term rental. We just don't have a short-term rental yet. So the two most closely land uses we have identified in our code are bed and breakfast, but you have a copy of that, and all of the requirements that they have to meet in order to get a conditional use permit to operate in an R1 zone. But bed and breakfasts are normally owner occupied, so the person or the couple that's running it have to live there, and then they rent out a max, I think 2 to maximum 4 of other bedrooms, but they have to live there in order to operate a bed and breakfast in the R1. And then you also have lodging use as well. And that's when normally someone doesn't live there, that's transient lodging, no one lives there. And that's a commercial use that's in the C zones. But you also have the use chart that's in there at the very back showing where those are allowed by right with the conditional use permit. But yeah, typically a bed and breakfast, the big difference is that someone lives there and breakfast obviously is served. That is a requirement, and normally short-term rentals don't have a full breakfast served by the person living there. So it doesn't really fit into that category at this time.
Another key point in that is that it has to be in an A1 district, is that right?
Bed and breakfast?
R1.
It requires a conditional use permit to be in the R1 zone from the planning commission.
Okay. Something else that you may want to think
It's
about
permitted in A1.
is,
I think it may.
Read it closely, it is separated.
with us this afternoon is Richard from the Arkansas Health Department. Thank you. And he waxed eloquent at our last work session. And so I've asked him to join us today to give us some guidance as we work through this. One of the things that we've been talking about is linking the number of people to the septic rules and regulations from ADH. And we may want to actually include long-term rentals as well into a separate ordinance with the short-term rentals as to the actual occupancy. Because I'm convinced that some of the long-term rentals too are probably way overused on their septic systems through their bedrooms. And that will give us a step forward so that if we decide that we want to turn our attention to the long term, we've got a basis at least for occupancy. So that's something else that you may want to think about. Also at your desk, there is a letter back and forth from our chief building inspector in Taylor, going back to July, where serious questions are asked. That's it there, John.
Yeah, I think
And
they have it.
you have it there?
Yeah,
Okay.
July 22nd.
Okay. So you may want to glance through that as well. Fred is a wealth of knowledge, as well as Taylor. And then finally, I think all of you got this last night from Abby Foster, who
Yes.
spoke at the council meeting. And she's put some comments in there, and in many places she's agreed with what we're doing. So there's a lot to digest. We have 4 proposed ordinances. Some of them are very close. And at this point, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Doug. He's been working on this for well over a year, has far more information and is well-read than I suspect most of us. So Doug, if you'll take it away, please.
Mayor, before he starts, we are going to separate out the septic issue and make that a separate issue. We're not including septic in the short-term rental ordinance, is that right?
It's entirely up to you. You know, what I'm suggesting is you link the septic and the occupancy for both STRs and long-term. But you don't have to do that. It's entirely up to what the council feels fitting.
Personally, I think it would certainly make the STR ordinance a lot less complicated if the septic issue was separated as an individual issue.
Okay, good.
Okay. Yeah, so me being the point person, I don't know how comfortable everyone on council is with that. But, you know, I have been working on it for a long time, and I would just like to reiterate once again that it was not me individually, right? I worked with CDS, Taylor, and Megan, Doug, and of course Derek, who's now departed for other pastures. And we put a lot of time, a lot of effort. First of all, just a conversation around situations, issues that were unfolding in Bella Vista that we were both made aware of, and not at the same time necessarily. I mean, my concern came from emails, from conversations, residents in the community, you know, coming to me with concerns about short-term rentals. I do think, and I stated this in another meeting, it's really interesting how these issues began to evolved after vacation rentals exited the business of managing short-term rentals. And I've been able to have a conversation with the gentleman that's president of Vacation Rentals. His name is Dan Lombard. And he just, just gave me a voiceover. Whenever they had that responsibility, they knew how important it was to be like Johnny on the spot if there was an issue taking place. People around the rentals that they had available knew who to call if something was unfolding. And as soon as Vacation Rentals received the call, they were there and they were handling it and they were managing it. Well, whenever that went away, and then with the advent of VRBO, Airbnb, et cetera, where owners were able to list, individually, some of that oversight was lost. Now, I'm not going to make a blanket statement about short-term rental owners and properties. I know that there are many of them that are managed very well, very tightly, and there probably are not, many of any issues at some of them. So I want to recognize that right up front. I will tell you as well, through the data that I get from Granicus that no one else has really had their eyes on but me, it's really hard to share. And when I say it's hard to share, you have to have somewhat of a skill set in Microsoft Excel in order to manipulate the data, kind of sort things out so it's useful to you. We have many short-term rentals that have like 2 bedrooms and they have an occupancy of 4 people, right? That's some of the information you get back from Granicus. So you'll get number of bedrooms, you get occupancy, etc. Just because I just mentioned it, something else we can do really easily, we get parcel numbers with these short-term rentals. So I'm able to go into Benton County, Arkansas, go into the GIS base map. I can see the square footage of the home. They have the septic permits linked to the homes, and actually CDS has even a higher level view than I do. I mean, I can get the original inspection on a lot of them, but I can't get the actual map on some of them that I know is available and that you guys can get your hands on. So we're able to get a myriad of other information out of the data that Granicus gets to us, right? Through a little more manipulation, I have the ability to see how many STRs are on a particular street. But I have to go through some gyrations to get there because you get house numbers, you have to take the house numbers out or you can't sort the data, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, we do have the ability to look pretty granular at the STR business model that we have operating in Bella Vista right now. Okay, so we work together very closely, right? And we sifted through, I don't even know, myriad of short-term rental ordinances from cities across the country, particularly in Arkansas too, the ones that were available. And we basically laid out kind of point by point the different intentions that were written into most of them. And there really are a lot of similarities city to city to city. And with some cities having their own twists based upon certain situations that they may be facing that maybe we aren't or we are not yet. Some of the short-term rental ordinances are written because their cities are just becoming overrun. It's taking up all the available housing for people that want to move in or for current residents. They can't afford it any longer. The house prices are ballooning. That maybe isn't quite happening here yet, but it's something to think about because it certainly could, okay? Something to put in the back of your mind. So we went by point, we laid everything out, and then we sat down around a table, and I don't know how many times we met. I have no idea, many. And we would literally go around the table, we talk about what our position is on each point. We didn't always agree. Never had an argument, but we didn't necessarily always agree. But there was give and take in the process. It's like, okay, this is where I am. Well, I'm here. Well, I'm here also. And everybody, okay, I hear what you're saying. So we can either agree to something in between, or you know what? You've convinced me that this is where we need to be and this is where we will start, okay, on these different points. At the end of the day, I think the original ordinance that we put together was a good one. I think it kind of hit the sweet spot in a way for the issues that we are facing here in Bella Vista. Now, having said that, from the original ordinance that was passed around to everybody, from feedback that we had received, we made some adjustments already because I thought they made sense. One is in the permitting fee. We kicked that one around. I was at one number, CDS was a little bit different number because they had done some math and said, look, if we're going to manage this ordinance, we're going to really need to spend X amount of dollars for maybe a little additional manpower, et cetera. So if we do this much per home, then we can get to the number, the permit fee that gives us the total number that we need to be able to manage this, okay? I was at a lower number. So we started out at $400, just kind of blanket. Take a step back, you heard, well, that's, it's really not proportional. Well, did a little further reading, and I'm just kind of giving you an example, right, of how we went through this process. I'm reading an ordinance through Hot Springs, Arkansas, and they do their permitting fees by per head count occupancy, right? So one head count, $50, two head counts, $50 times two, it's $100, et cetera. So it makes it proportional. That made sense to me. So when we rewrote and did a second draft, included that change in there. I'm trying to think of the other change that we made.
One inspection?
The inspections. Now, we didn't really make the change on the inspections yet, but take a step back. People had some pushback on inspections. I can understand it. I do think they're necessary. But do we need to do it every year or every 2 years? I don't know, not necessarily. Maybe we do just a one-time safety inspection so we can go in, get our eyes on the bedrooms, see if there's 2 points of egress, right? Make sure that the smoke detectors, make sure that the fire extinguishers are there, get our eyes on the electrical. We have had a lot of amateur contractors move into homes and make a lot of changes to homes themselves. They think they know what they're doing, but they don't, and there are potentially some serious situations that could be taking place in these homes through faulty wiring, okay? Another thing, people I don't think a lot about this potentially, but there are decks in Bella Vista. And I've experienced this at my house. I was doing kind of like a home remodel. I discovered through putting in a sliding glass door that the board from the deck that will fit up next to the rim board in the home, there was no flashing, there was no water barrier, there's no nothing. My rim board was all rotted out. And in pulling the board off away from the house, it had not been bolted to the rim board. It was just shot on with like 16 penny nails. My deck is only 18 inches at one end and 36 inches on the other, so it's not necessarily a life or death maybe situation if it would pull away from the house and maybe fall over. But we have decks that are 15 and 25 feet high in Bella Vista that go off down in ravines. I guarantee you we have homes with unsafe decks, and one of these days we're going to get a phone call and one of us is going to pull away from the house because we're going to have 8, 10, 15 people on that deck. It's going to give away and it's going to fall down into a ravine. It's just it's a disaster waiting to happen.
It has happened.
Okay, in Bella Vista, so there you go. So just to go and get a one-time look, okay, and get a feel. Also, for the inspectors to go in is to determine the number of bedrooms in a home. Short-term rental owners may not like it, may not agree with it, but in a myriad of short-term rental ordinances that I have read, it isn't the short-term rental owner that determines the number of bedrooms. It's the city, and the building inspector determines the number of bedrooms. Fred, where Fred Huddleston comes into play, is when we were writing the septic ordinance for new construction builds, that you have to tie your occupancy to the size of the septic build out. There is a part of the code, I guess it's the fire code, that basically gives the head building inspector the ability, the authority to determine the number of bedrooms in that home. So if you have a 2-bedroom septic situation and then it's pretty obvious that the home actually has 3 bedrooms, you can call it a study or a workout room, a craft room, whatever you want to call it. But like if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, and quacks like a duck, then it's probably a duck. And that building inspector has the authority to say, you call it what you want, that's a bedroom. So then that's when we require the deed restriction to be attached to that home, okay? So that's why, Fred and the city determining the number of bedrooms of a home should probably take precedence, okay? So there's one home, and I have an example, and I've got many of them, that it's a 2,200 square foot home. Lists itself as having 5 bedrooms. Well, I went back, I pulled the address, I pulled the oh my gosh, anyway, the number, I pulled it back on the GIS base map, and it was originally listed like it's a 2-bedroom home, but now magically it has 5. I'm not going to sit here and call people out here today and give names. That's not what I'm about. I'm just saying, I know that there are homes that are listing more bedrooms than what they have, okay? And they just are. So, but anyway, a one-time inspection, and maybe that will suffice, and not do multiple inspections like year over year or biannually or whatever. Separate classifications. We maybe talked about it when we were going around the table, but I don't think we kind of vetted that one out really. But I think it makes sense, you know, that we have standalone housing, right? And then if you have a bedroom or if you have a space in your home and you're going to live there and you want to rent it out, we classify that differently, and maybe we treat it differently. I don't have an issue with that. Don't have it written into mine, but I'm certainly open to it. The last thing is the cap. We talked about maybe initiating a cap in the original ordinance, but when it was originally written, there were only like 350, I say only, maybe that's a high number in reality, it's kind of hard to gauge that. It was 350, and I'm like, well, I don't know if it's really important that we try to initiate a cap right now. We have enough in the ordinance. There are going to be hurdles we know we're going to have to get over with the other city council members, so let's just let that one set to the side for right now, and if we think we need to do something with it later, we can, okay? But now that it's identified 462, and we really don't know that that's the top end yet, maybe it makes sense to go ahead and initiate a cap. And I go back to comments, you know, especially one person made, be careful, they're coming fast. And the next thing you know, you're going to lose your sense of community. Your neighborhoods are not going to be neighborhoods any longer. You're not going to know your neighbors because they're not going to be your neighbors. You're not going to leave your garage doors open, etc. And also, it's going to start chipping into our affordable housing. It just will. So maybe it makes sense that we initiate a cap. And that's another one I can have a conversation about. So the initial ordinance that we started with, I think was really, it's a good place to start because it was really vetted and really thought out and really thought through. But as I just mentioned, we have made some adjustments, and there are additional ones I'm certainly willing to talk about. You know, even the master painters, you know, from back in the day, Van Goghs and Monets and whoever they are, when they created their masterpieces, almost every one of them went back and looked at those masterpieces you see today, and there have been adjustments made to them in color, in, you know, how people are positioned, etc. So we're not going to create a masterpiece today during this section. We just have to know that we've got to get it where we think it's pretty good. And if we need to go back and we need to adjust it, massage it a little bit later, we have the ability to do that, okay? Thinking through how to work through this, we have 4 on the table right now. I would think, I don't know, that the other 3 that have come before us since then probably used the original one that was presented. And then everybody kind of made their own individual tweaks. So I talked through some of the things we already changed and are willing to, you know, adjust. And maybe the thing to do from the original one that was adjusted is kind of like go around the table and say, look, the original one I saw, this is what I would like to see done. Now, here's something else. I'm just going to say it right up front so the audience understands, or anyone that might be listening to this, a live stream, however this is being done. Yeah, I guess we are being streamed. Not all 6 city council members have to agree on an ordinance, the final one. 4 is a majority, right? But it could be 3 and the mayor breaks the tie. So where we need to get to is a consensus. It would be great if all 6 could agree. I don't know if we're going to get there or not, but we're all going to have to be willing to kind of negotiate, maybe fall back a little bit on a position we really think we're steadfast on, and maybe there are some stakes in the ground that can't be moved. But again, we just need to get to a consensus. And I think it's important that we do this for the residents of Bella Vista, for the health of the city. I really do. Because the more I hear, the more information on septic systems, and I'll take a step back. So we're talking about maybe leaving septic out of this. I don't really think that's the thing to do, personally. But even if you take the septic out of it, let's take it out completely. Does it make any sense in a single family residential home to have, I'll even set the number low, 8, especially 10, 12, 14, 16 people coming and going every weekend on the street in a neighborhood where you probably have 2, maybe 4 people at the most living on either side of you. Now, on the east side, the situation is a little different than the west side. I understand that because there are more families over there. But again, does it make sense to have 10, 12, 14 people coming and going week in and week out? And maybe even more times than that per week during the summer. I think it would make anyone uncomfortable, and I don't think anybody would probably, I'm not trying to speak for everybody. I wouldn't be comfortable with it. And, somebody asked the question last night, I think it was the first speaker during our feedback, or, during our public comment, wanted to know if any of the city council members owned or had any short-term rentals ourselves. I didn't answer, I don't. And I don't know if anyone else here does. I don't. I will say this though, on our street, we just had a home up for sale, Cherry Home on the green, number par 3, Scottsdale Golf Course, and it was available, and people up and down the street were on pins and needles. Our neighborhood, everybody knows everyone. Everybody walks up and down the street. Everyone has conversations. Everybody watches everybody's back. It's just that kind. It's a wonderful neighborhood. That one home that is sitting there is kind of like right in the middle of everything. And I know it would change the dynamic of our street. It just would, right? Because if you take that home and if you don't have any occupancy limits on it, it's like 1,800 square feet. It has 3 bedrooms. So you say, well, 2 people per bedroom. Let's just say you limit it at that. Then you have the living room. You can put a fold-out couch in. Then you got a sunroom, maybe you could call that a bedroom as well. You could put 10 people in an 1,800 square foot home, right? And it's a golf, it's basically, you're gonna have probably more than likely a lot of more golfers than there are anything else. Pack them in there, every weekend, playing golf all day long, coming back to the place, getting back on the deck, right? Barbecuing, beer, music. I'm just saying, this is a scenario, right, that a lot of our residents are having to live like right now. I don't know, you'd be the judge, I know how I feel about it, but it just doesn't feel like that's the right thing to do for our, to place our permanent residents in that situation and expect that they should just have to live with it. And people can say, well, we have ordinances, we have this and that noise and parking and traffic. Yes, we do. But I fall back on again, it is not up to the city or the mayor or the neighbors to end up being managers of that property. That's up to the short-term rental owners. They own it, it's a business, they're making money out of it, and they should be responsible for what's taking place at that property. I'll tell you, the more people you have, the more issues you're gonna have. So anyway, regardless of whether you use the septic situation or you're just saying what makes sense on occupancy, what type of numbers do make sense? And I realize and understand some homes are bigger than others, right? Maybe you've got a 5,000 square foot home. Maybe 10 people make sense in a 5,000 square foot home. But not in an 1,800, 2,300, or 2,800 square foot home, and we have a lot of those. We have a 3,200 square foot home that has an occupancy limit of 17 people. That home is like 20 feet away from the home right next door to it. The deck is right by the master bedroom. It causes all kinds of issues. But I could go through a myriad of those examples. That's just one. So anyway, I'm just going to say, I'll wrap it up and say maybe we kind of go around the table and say what we're willing to accept, what we're not, and see if we can't come to some similarities and see if we can't get something put together and finalize and get before the council. So, I'm sorry, do you want to just have a comment, or do you just want to start?
I'll start the process, but have a comment.
Can I just provide one point before you start? There was another change from the original that's pretty significant that was discussed that we haven't talked. That was that we removed the web-based list of addresses on the city website. That was a safety concern that some people talked about, and that in Mr. Fowler's latest has been removed. So I just wanted to add that.
There was one one other comment I was going to make that was relevant, but I have to think about it again.
Okay.
Steve?
I wanted to start and just say thank you, Doug, for the manner in which that was presented. I think that's reasonable. I share your objective here that we kind of cipher out, if not today, in the near future, we cipher out, where can the city council line up? Not necessarily unanimously, but in consensus, in sufficient votes to support an ordinance that does balance protecting our neighborhoods with property right owners. We're trying to do right by both sides of those. So I appreciate the way that's been presented. And the adjustments that have been made from the original. I think those are make me feel more comfortable about it. This topic is kind of, Jerry brought it up first, and he was talking about taking septic out of it. And I wonder if what you mean by taking septic out of it is taking some kind of occupancy maximum tied to septic. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's talk about occupancy maximums, whether they're driven by septic or they're just set, which I contemplated that too, just saying, hey, you know what? For the reasons of impacts to the neighborhoods, maybe no short-term rental should have more than 10 guests in it at any time. Maybe that's consistent with the neighborhood that, have 10 people in a short-term rental. But I want to really be careful that we don't adopt an ordinance that we cannot enforce. And so I've tried to think through how we enforce these occupancy maximums. In fact, I had a conversation with Doug about this a little bit. As city staff, I kind of wanted Doug just sit me down and kind of talk me through the process of how do we write the very first citation to a short-term rental operator that is exceeding the maximum that we've determined is their maximum, either by way of their septic capacity or by their bedroom capacity. Either one of those. Let's say we've got a number, and for this house, the number is 8 people. What do we do? What's the first time the city writes a violation of a maximum occupancy? How do we go through that process?
Can I just do one thing? I just want you to know, again, first thing, and I read this in one ordinance, through VRBO or Airbnb, remember, it lists occupancy. The first thing is
Yes.
you can't list your home for any more occupancy than what is permitted by the city.
Right.
So that's one thing you can do, right?
Well,
And
we didn't
then-
make that illegal, though. None of our ordinances make that illegal, how you market it. Then when you go...
But you're asking, how do you know if they are marketing?
Well, how
or
do we
they're
write that
more than-
first? Let's let Doug take a shot. How do you write that first violation notice?
Well, I think that your section in most of these ordinances has a violation listed. So if someone gets a permit from us and the house is permitted for 6 or 8, and or Granicus finds a listing for 10 or 14, that's violation number 1.
Okay, so they have marketed the property for more than we would want them to have occupy the property, right?
Correct.
Now, I think our city attorney wants to prosecute that, and he goes before the judge, and the judge is going to say, your ordinance says they cannot occupy for more than 8 people. Where is the proof that they occupied by more than 8? Not that they marketed something, may or may not have had guests at that.
I mean, I don't know how we would walk into a house and determine if there's 20 people there,
Exactly.
12 are staying and 8 are not, or 14 are staying.
Yes.
But I mean, I think it would just be off of the permit versus the market. You want to add to that?
It's 2 different things. I think currently occupying and marketing are 2 different aspects. I mean, if you have a party with 30 people going on near a lake, that's different than them posting 10 people. So it's 2 different, I think.
You're
sides
gonna
of the
have to
coin.
depend on the people who live in the area to let you know what's going on.
Witnesses,
Yeah,
neighbors.
yeah.
I think there
Because
were
you're gonna
10.
have to have that. They're not gonna take he said, she said.
Right.
But the neighbors will know. They can count.
Well, they can
And
count.
they
who's
will
coming
have
and
to, verify, yeah, that happened. And if they're not willing to do that, then we don't have anything.
Right.
So we need help from the neighborhood as to who violated. And once you do that, you write the ticket up because you had 12 people and your permit says 8.
Right.
Period. It's not necessarily that simple because you got to get people to come forward and people don't want to come forward. How many times in my career, and James 5 years here, people ain't coming forward. Well, they tell you 3 days later, I can't help you. But if you talk to me, then I can help you. It's going to be up to the people. And some people, even after we pass this, and we've even done it once or twice and run through the system, they're still going to be reluctant to call. It's an education of the other side too. Because if they're not going to help, we're not going to fix it. There's no way you can fix it without somebody's help.
Jim, do you see it as they witnessed 10 people go into the house and therefore they can call the city?
It would take a little more than that, but if you're living next door, you can tell at night what's going on. Okay?
Let's check with the city attorney. Is that easy to take that into before the judge?
I mean, you have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that someone would have violated. So one of the concerns that I would have prosecuting the case is, how do you know they stayed overnight unless you saw them go in that evening and saw the same people go out that morning? That would be some evidence. Obviously, if they've marketed it for 10, that's some evidence as well.
Right.
Yes, and then have to be direct evidence. Good enforcement is going to go knock on the door when there's a complaint and say, hello, can you tell me how many people are staying in this house? They may not answer. They may say, yeah, we got a dozen people or whatever. So good investigation, some people may tell them themselves. They may say, I'm not telling you anything, shut the door. But that's the case in all of criminal enforcement.
Yeah.
It's a matter of, can you get enough information together? Will people give a statement? Can you put two and two together? Can you see something? Can you prove it?
I think my point to all that is can we move the target slightly and make it against the law to market to a certain
Well, so
occupancy?
may I? Because as we talk through this, because oh my God, I only brought a portion of what I have. Okay, I'm trying to remember what I have at my fingertips, and this was presented to us or given to us. A gentleman tried to read it last night, didn't have time here. Sent it out by email today. First of all, and Taylor just left the room. She sent an email, I guess it was last week, with examples from four other cities. And in one of those ordinances, it was written in there that if a company, I'm just going to word it like this, may not be exactly like this, if a company, which would be VRBO or Airbnb or whatever, if they violate the city ordinances, like in any way, shape, or form that are written for that particular city, they will be banned from doing business in that city. Okay? Now, I read, this is from Evolve, okay? Part of their rental agreement.
Are you talking one violation?
I don't know if it's one or not. I'd have to go back and read the specific. Well, I don't know if it's one or not. I'm just saying it's written in there. That and maybe it's continually, maybe it's 3. I don't know how many violations. I'm just saying they wrote it in their code that if these booking agencies violate that city's ordinances, in any way, then they could be banned from doing business in that city. So this is again Evolved. The maximum number of people that may occupy the vacation rental is indicated in the listing description. For clarification, this number applies to all overnight guests, day visitors, and children. Occupancy over the indicated capacity may result in the immediate removal of you and other members of your party from the vacation rental and forfeiture of all amounts paid. So they have it written right into their rental agreement with whoever's saying, I'm going to rent that property. I will not violate that.
And you're talking about first offense. Well, you can't hardly fire anybody anymore for a first offense. It's a verbal warning and a written warning, and then we go ahead and show you the door. So in this case, we could do the same route. The first time, we're knocking on the door, we're notifying the owner, even though he doesn't live here, and we're notifying the keeper of the house. Second time, it's on paper. Notify both of them again. And then third time, permit, fine, everything. All works.
I think Mr. Kelly wants to say something.
I want to say that just looking at Mr. Fowler's proposal, it would be very easy to make a small addition to section 6 on section 5 at somewhere either at the bottom of page 2 or top of page 3 or so. It would be top of page 3. It currently says that a short-term rental shall be used for purposes of overnight guest accommodation and shall not be marketed or used for receptions, parties, weddings, or other wedding-related parties, corporate meetings, or similar activities. And I think you could just add to that, nor shall short-term rentals be listed for rent for more persons than are permitted by the city permit or something. I mean, better
Yes.
worded than that. And that way, the marketing of it would be a violation.
that
of the
seems
per-
to me
And that would
enforceable.
catch a lot of it. Now, if they're really, if they say they market it correctly, it's capped at 8 for the, just for example.
Right.
And so, and it's listed as 8 on Airbnb, and they list the 8 I don't know how all it works, but let's say it's all legit in the sign up, it's all squared away, it's marketed correctly. But those 8 people have a couple of friends go to college down in Fayetteville, they're gonna crash in the floor because they're leasing the Airbnb, and there's really 10 in there. Well, you know, that's over occupancy, that's a violation.
Yeah.
So you'd have, that's not a marketing question, that would be purely an occupancy issue.
Right.
But if they
But
were
the most difficult to
over,
prosecute, I think.
yeah, but if you had it listed that we'll lease it to 10 and the permit's only 8 and the ordinance says you can only market it for up to 8, which is what the total permit, then that would be a much easier enforcement situation.
Jason, if you as a prosecutor have an affidavit from a next door neighbor who says they're quite sure they exceeded their occupancy,
Well,
is that enough to
no.
write a citation?
No, they would have to come testify in court. Oh, well, no, well, think about timing here though, Steve, because we're, all right, so it's 11 o'clock at night on Friday night. They're over occupying. Well, when are they gonna write the affidavit? When, and then, you know, maybe Tuesday we'll get around to, and they're gone. It's,
Yeah.
you know, Sunday
Yeah.
night, they're gonna
Yeah.
be gone. So it's gonna have to be some sort of scenario where an enforcement officer or police officer can go out there at ungodly hours when
Yeah.
these things happen
Yeah.
and be able to effectively do something.
Right.
And that goes for noise, and it goes for public drinking, and it
Yeah.
goes for all the other stuff too.
True, and I could see, you know, it's not a function of, it's capped at 8, and then the 2 college buddies come over, and there's 10 people back there having a party, therefore they've violated the maximum occupancy. I don't think that's the intent.
Well, if they intend to leave, they're not staying
Right,
overnight. They're
yes.
just, I mean, there's nothing that says you couldn't have additional guests.
Right.
There's nothing that says you can't have a party.
Yeah.
You can't just market it to say, have your wedding party at 123 Main Street. It has to be marketed for overnight
Right,
accommodation.
I don't think any of us see the police knocking at the door at 2 o'clock in the morning and saying, okay, lineup time, we're gonna count
Well,
your
they have-
guests. Yeah.
Well, they'd have to have some reason to do that.
Well, I don't know. I don't-
But,
what
and
might
in
be.
some, there's no obligation to answer the door when there's a knockout either.
Okay, there's that.
Okay.
So that's why
Or
I think
enforcement.
moving the target towards how it would be marketed would be much more effective.
That's a good idea about the marketing, but I think it's still a good idea to have a rule. I mean, go out on the street, it says 35 miles an hour, and there's people driving 40 and 45, and they don't get stopped. That
Not
doesn't mean
always.
it's a bad idea to say 35.
No, but it
It's a
is
good idea.
enforceable.
Yeah,
At
so
some
the
point, you can
marketing
detect
would
it.
make it better.
So just so you know, there are ordinances that have a hard, fast rule, this is the number. And then there are ordinances that say, this is the occupancy, you can have no more than 50% more people at the home at any given time. You know,
Yeah.
like from the time of whatever to whatever, 10 o'clock or midnight or whatever. So they are written, they're
Yeah,
different.
yeah.
One thing I would like to do, see while we're doing it, because we do have Richard here, when he was here the other night, the septic, and look, we're a city council, we're 6 members. And his knowledge is invaluable, I think. And we can all listen to him. Doesn't mean that at the end of the day, anybody listens to him and anybody follows what his recommendation may be one way or the other, right? I mean, we don't have to follow what he says, but I think it's a good idea to really think about it. And I asked the other day, Richard, if you recall, if it would be a good idea, I think, to write an ordinance, or at least you thought it was a good idea. And then I asked if there's any wiggle room, right? If it's a 2-bedroom septic, that's 4 people, so is a wiggle room. Can you say 4 plus 2? Is that out of the realm, to try to give a little breathing room there potentially? Can you, Richard, give some feedback on that? You know what, this was my takeaway from the other night, is I don't know if you thought that was a very good idea or not, but do you have any just feedback for us to think about?
Yeah, you know how we had talked about how the water usage that we use for sizing systems in Bella Vista is 150 gallons per bedroom. And other parts of the county and the state, we don't use 150 gallons per bedroom. We use 150 for the first bedroom, 120 for the second, and then 100 for the third, and then 50 gallons more per additional bedroom. So that water usage increases again at a decreasing rate. So you don't have it, it's not going up 150 gallons per bedroom. That's one of the little safety features built into some of the septic system design in Bella Vista is because we are using that higher estimated water usage per bedroom. So a septic system built in another part of the county, I would say 2 people per bedroom per house. In Bella Vista for these rentals, I think you can go 3 people per bedroom per house, just because the systems are sized just a little bit larger.
And that's a hard, fast rule, is that right?
Which
That the systems are sized up a little bit in Bella Vista.
They are. The water usage is a little different.
For what time
And what
period
year did
backwards?
that start?
Well, that's a good question, because it was, it should have always been that way, but I think it was caught probably, I don't know, 15 years or so ago. It was caught and said, oh yeah, we need to be doing this at 150 gallons per bedroom. So there's going to be some houses out there, plus that are probably sized based on that other water usage that still we're using here. But I think instead of just saying, and again, I'm talking about if you've got one of these things that isn't occupied 7 days a week, all the time, you have that little rest period in there for the septic system too. That could help. So I think going at a maximum occupancy of 3 people per bedroom would probably be pretty safe, in this situation.
And that would be 3 people per designated bedroom on the plan. In other words,
Right.
if the septic is a 2-bedroom house
Yep.
or a 3-bedroom house, you would end up with 3 at those 2 or 3 or
Right.
4.
Yeah, whatever the system was sized for. So like you were talking about earlier, where they had a 2-bedroom septic system, and now they're, saying the house is a 5-bedroom. Well, it really needs to be based on that 2-bedroom septic system, in my opinion.
Yeah, that was like 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, if
Is it easy enough for a member of city staff to look at the permit and
Yes.
know this is how many bedrooms that septic is designed for?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
That's
Steve, I've got
accessible.
some of them I've printed out right here.
The council needs to remember too, is that when we did the issue with the house reviews and the number of septics and the building permit, when we went through that, that was the first phase. We had a second phase that we were going to talk about implementing, and that had to do with dealing with the issue of additions to a house with septic system, but it had to do with the counting of the bedroom and all those kinds of things. So some of this is still on the table from what we had intended to do before.
And what Steve's, I only saw it in one, that had a time frame between the first violation and the second. One of them was as many as 5. That's a long time to cut somebody some slack. That number's got to be down to like 6 months to a year between violations.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that makes sense as far as trying to chase down an ordinance that I think is very difficult to enforce. If we could adjust the target there, cover the marketing side of it, that's where you can capture, I think, easily. You're in violation because you're marketing for more capacity than you have septic capacity for.
I don't disagree.
Okay.
And like I said, I'm willing to work. We did what we could, and there are a lot of other smart people in the room, right? So that makes sense to me.
I think that I can close out my comments for now. I do believe also the owner-occupied rentals, like a downstairs rental or a one-room rental, I'd like to see those exempt from this. These are people that are having a hard time meeting their mortgage payment, and they're just trying to do something in the privacy of their own home. They don't need us walking through there, looking around their bedrooms and stuff and making sure everything's okay. If it's owner-occupied, I hope we can make it exempt. And then finally, health and safety inspections. Yeah, I just felt like it was a big burden on the city. I believe we would need more staff if we were going to do that every year. So if we could stretch that out and say you're going to have to do that once every X number of years, I could get on board with that too.
I don't have a problem.
I have a
Yeah.
question about that. On the owner-occupied issue, I see the rationale for being exempt from some of these inspections and whatnot. But by law, you're not exempt from the taxes, are you?
No.
So you
No.
still need to identify
Yes.
people.
Yeah, you still identify, you still are listed, yes.
One of the keys, I think, to this is that if you go back to that Garland County issue that Attorney Kelly sent us out here 6 months ago, it dealt with several subdivisions where one of the properties was, the owner died and the family took it over and then they rented it out like a vacation rental thing. And the neighbors took him to court saying it was in violation of the covenants for those subdivisions. And the court, when they looked at it, and it brings to my point, is that I think we need the word nuisance defined as a violation of our ordinance. And the nuisance means that you get a black mark. When we go to your renewal, it might be if you get 2 black marks, your permit gets pulled and you can no longer operate for 6 months or something. But I think we need the word nuisance defined. What the court said is that nuisance is defined as the conduct of one landowner that unreasonably interferes with the use and enjoyment of lands of another and includes conduct on property that disturbs the peaceful, quiet, and undisturbed use and enjoyment of the nearby properties. And
Well, the one judge went with the group, and then on appeal, they lost it.
well,
Let's ask Mr. Kelly on nuisance.
Nuisance is, I think you're going to find, well, I know you're going to find, have to be declared by the court. We generally use the term nuisance as like they're loud and they're drinking, but we have very specific ordinances that prohibit very specific activity, not just they're a nuisance. Legal nuisances are declared by a court, and yes, it does meet that definition Mr. Wilms read, but what that really would do would be to permit the neighbor to go to circuit court and get an injunction against them, declaring it a nuisance and then shutting it down. So we're kind of conflating terms a little bit. There is, and this came up last night to an extent too, and that is the neighbors want to have a say in whether there's a permit or not. And the neighbors want to have a say in whether it's revoked or not. That is absolutely constitutionally illegal. I don't really, they're not intending it for it to be, but we can't as a city condition and say someone's met all of our requirements, but you better convince your neighbor to say it's okay or you're not going to get it. That's not going to meet any legal test. Obviously, I think I'm not saying there's not some way to take into consideration the public. I mean, obviously in cities where they go the route of conditional use permit, which we're not doing, but when you go down the route of conditional use permit, you get public statement and comment about a particular property and the traffic and all that sort of stuff, and that does come into play in that, but it's not necessarily a neighbor veto. And what I'm hearing is that there really a desire for a neighbor veto, and that sort of a concept is not going to work.
Yeah, that struck me as very unworkable when it was brought. I can understand why somebody would bring it up, but I thought that was extremely unworkable.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with you, Jason, but you know, it's written into their code in Joplin, Missouri.
And
If you live within
and
185 feet.
That's a different study.
I'm not saying it's right.
I have serious constitutional concerns about that.
I'm not
I'm
an
gonna let them
advocate
worry
of
about
it.
it, okay?
I'm just saying that it is written into, into theirs.
No, it's any good to somebody
Well,
fight.
no, I'm not saying what I'm saying is that some cities that don't try to do things the right way, let me back up. I'm not saying Joplin isn't trying to do things the right way. What I'm trying to say is there are a lot of cities that would rather just do it and deal with the consequences later and do what they can, and then other cities that would rather not go down that risk and potentially have a problem knowing that it's going to be a problem moving forward, is what I'm saying.
So let me just recap for a second. I think we've maybe got a consensus based on Richard as the expert. In Bella Vista, 3 people per bedroom, but the number of people, or the occupancy, is based on the number of bedrooms that originally show on the septic plan. Would that be correct?
Unless they've gotten a new plan approved, where they've increased the size of it. Yeah,
Okay.
Most current permit.
That's fair. We've also, I think, got a consensus on exempting the owner occupied. I think we've got consensus on 1 initial inspection. And there's now a couple of other things that we have to talk about. One is the cost of the permit and the cost of the inspection. So Doug and I sat down, and if we cap it at 500, for example, we believe that's doable for one FTE who would have to be hired. And when you price it out, you probably have to start at $20 an hour, given the current marketplace, and you throw in the benefits at 28%, it comes out to an amount of 50-something, and you divide it by 500, it works out to $106.50 to have that permit investigated and everything else by the clerk, and then issue the permit. On the inspection side, because in mine I had not put an inspection in because mine was initially just going to be a stopgap to actually get us where we are now. So I'm delighted that we're having this conversation so early, because I didn't think it was going to happen. So I mentioned to Doug, so what would be a reasonable cost for, I imagine, a building inspector to go out and actually do, the checklist and everything else? Any idea?
I mean, you're looking probably at an hour for a code officer to go do an inspection, or a building inspector.
Okay.
So if you capped it at 500, I mean, initially you would have several in the first few months, and then it would plane out as people renew, but I haven't put a pencil to the per hour fee for just inspections, but I would think that on days when they have fewer building inspections, they could get several short-term rental inspections done, and then some days they're just completely loaded with building inspections, and you may have to push them.
And the other thing to consider is that if there has to be a re-inspection. And
If
so
they're
we have
on
to
a
go back.
problem, then there will be a re-inspection.
Right.
Yeah.
And that cost,
Re-inspections ought to be a charge, because the list of
That's
what,
the way we handle it now. Yeah.
the list of what needs to be complied with is available either in the checklist that the CDS uses, or available somewhere out in the system of what needs to be complied with.
okay, so there's still a question mark, so you'd have to sharpen your pencil?
So if you, 500 is, let's just say 500 is the limit. 5 people, I'm just doing an average, this is back of the envelope math. 500 times 5 people times $50 per head count would be $125,000. That's what that would be.
And that's, I'm sorry,
That's
I
annual.
didn't follow. That's the cost of, or that's the revenue generated?
Yes.
That, for the inspection?
No, for the permit.
Okay, for the permit, all right.
And that would pay for, the inspectors.
Yeah.
Jason, let me know if this is legal. We have, well, no, it's a contract kind of thing.
Okay.
We have a city inspector who's going to go do some of this, okay? And we've got a cap on what it's going to cost. Could we get private people certified by the city and tell them this is what you can charge? And then they would be between them and that person, the homeowner.
Yes, there's a way to do that.
Like a house inspection
Yeah, I
professional?
mean, hire guys on the outside, tell them, we got X number of houses, this is what you can charge. Same price we would charge.
We would in some way certify those
Right.
inspectors in some
Right.
fashion.
Yeah,
There's a way to do that.
Somebody, part-time looking for something to do, can do a couple here and a couple there and make himself some bucks and take some of the burden off of you guys.
Possibly take all the burden off of
Well,
them.
we'll need to,
Depending.
we'll need to have another ordinance that would create a program for regulating and licensing short rental inspectors.
Well, Jason, if we just tapped into existing home inspection people, who I assume have some kind of permit from the state?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
home inspection people have a permit from the state.
Okay.
If we hand them the checklist and say, this is the service you're going to provide, what you charge is open to the market. There's going to be 30 people who want to do this. Let the open market determine
You can
what's
do
the
that.
fair price.
You
Just
can.
so long as the permit applicant brings back their signed off checklist, they've had it inspected, it meets with the inspector's approval.
You can do that, but think about those that operate on the edges, okay? There'll be people who'll get you cleared, you know, but they charge a little more, or we would never countenance that sort of thing, but I'm gonna tell you,
It could happen.
it could happen. I mean, you tell me, I don't want to impugn anyone's integrity, and if they have a license of some sort, they obviously want to keep it.
Becomes a license to steal.
But, you know, one of the things that, all right, I don't want to overcomplicate it. Yes, there's a way to do it. If you want to go down that road, we'll need to think about it, and there's going to be kind of another branch to this we'll need to work on.
Okay, I think Larry wants to say something.
I think you'd want the inspectors, if they're a third party, to be licensed inspectors or have a current license for doing
Depends
something.
on what you're asking them to inspect. If you include electrical in this inspection, then that needs to be licensed. by the
Well, I think
state as
GFIs would be
electrical
one of the
inspector.
things that they'd have to check for.
Home
but-
inspectors are not licensed electrical inspectors.
Is electric one of the things on our checklist, other than the
Should be.
plug-in works?
It should be.
Well, if you recall,
Depends on what you want.
the draft allowed the administration basically to come up with a list of safety criteria. And there was a draft of that, sort of an example that Taylor, I think, drafted, or someone over in the staff drafted, when they passed out to you sort of a sample application packet that we had thought of at one point. So they'd be inspecting against known standards. So I've got a couple of things, just loose end sort of things that I think are implicated by what I'm hearing. All right, so we're talking about a safety inspection, but not a septic inspection.
Well, I was going to bring that up.
Okay, all right, well, so I'll leave that where it is, and then y'all can discuss it. And then we've got a lot of short-term rentals that don't use septic tanks, so we're going to base the occupancy on for those that are on sanitary sewer. And will that be different than the ones that are on septic? You need to think about that.
I thought it was written in there that it is.
One of them is in there.
What's that mean?
It's, well,
It's not a very big
well,
number.
Just
we had
change
2
the first
people per
one.
bedroom plus 2.
Yes.
Yeah.
So now maybe it's, I don't know, 3 people per bedroom plus
Plus
2.
two.
Okay, I think Jerry wants to say something.
Has anybody given any thoughts about what a quagmire we're creating here?
Well, so far, it's not bad,
Uh,
believe me.
Well, I mean, we got inspection after inspection.
No, we're only talking about inspection.
Well,
So
we're talking about a safety inspection, a electrical inspection.
No, that's
No.
all the same inspection.
It's all part of
Because
that.
all of our building folks have all the necessary permits from the state. Electrical,
to
plumbing,
do.
the whole works.
But we're
But I
talking,
think this could be tailored to where that wasn't required, a code officer could do this, depending on how.
we're talking about someone else doing the
It could be
inspection.
a code enforcement person,
Maybe it should be.
you know?
I mean, for
But when-
septic
And then we're talking about a head count. I mean, we cannot put the police department in a position of counting people in a particular location because it's,
Well,
I got an
what we've been
occupancy.
talking about, let's zero in on the marketing.
How are you going to cite a marketing agency that's in Tennessee? How are you going to cite them? I mean, how are you
Because they
going?
signed it, they take care of it.
Okay, just a second, Jason's gonna.
Okay, if
We've got a
the
local
ordinance
person.
itself is going to apply to the owner. We talk about any person operating in violation of the ordinance, and we can work on that language a little bit and tailor it, but we want to be able to hold a person accountable for that, who's the owner, basically. It's a good question, Jerry. I mean, I think we probably need to work on our thinking about that in terms of enforcement, because we say now that any person operating a short-term rental in violation of this ordinance shall, and then be penalized, and we go through all the fines. We probably need to go about saying some other people who would be responsible, who could be violating. But you are correct. If we're dealing with anyone we're trying to get for a violation of a local ordinance that is not local, that's always very difficult.
Well, and you got the same situation of homeowner next door calls and says, hey, The house next door, the rental next door is not supposed to have more than 8 people there. They had 20 people there last night. They're gone. The homeowner next door, he's got no, he has no, well, he's got a complaint, but he's got no justification for any type of,
Well, he can't wait till the next day to call. He's got to call right then.
okay, so if he calls right then who's gonna go count the people?
You knock on the door. If they answer, you can ask them. If they won't talk to you, that's it. Walk away. Unless you can see them through the door.
But who's gonna do that?
The police or the
no.
enforcement during the day.
No, you're not gonna send them, no, that's going too far, taking the.
That's part of the job.
But, no, it's not counting people, no. That is not part of the police
But he's
department's job.
enforcing an ordinance. Same as the police enforce ordinances all the time.
That will be a mistake, that will be wrong. Put the police department in a position of going and knocking on people on a short-term rental door to determine how many people
So
are
who do you think
inside.
should do
Well,
it?
they've been called already on short-term rentals.
Yep.
On that
It's
one
part of the
party
job,
recently
Jerry.
on Lake Brittany.
That is not-
Police were
Noise
called.
issues, you got parking issues, you got all sorts of things.
Jerry, I share your concern, and
That is
that's
not-
why I've said,
That is-
the focus, if we can effectively shift the focus to the short-term rental operator and how they are marketing. Because I think if you tell the short-term rental operator, based on your septic capacity, your maximum is 8, and we're going to monitor how you market it. And if we see you marketing other than that, we're going to send you the nastygram that says, you're only entitled to market for 8. This is your first warning.
Okay.
I think they will cooperate.
So they market it for 8, and there's, they regularly 12 people in the house, or 12 people. I mean, at one point, there was a requirement for a representative, a person that represented the owner.
It's still in there.
Okay, it's still in there.
It's still in there.
All right, good, and it's still there. But that person had to live within 50 miles. If there's going to be someone that's going to go to that house, they're supposed to be responsible for what's taking place in that short-term rental. They're supposed to be the responsible party.
Yeah.
And if there's going to be someone go knock on the door and see how many people are there, it ought to be that person, not the police department. It ought to be that person. I mean, that person ought to be called, person next door calls at midnight, whatever time they call, then that person that's responsible for that particular property should be the person that's called to go deal with the situation.
That would be the first call.
Yes, because
That would be the
understanding
first,
that,
and I've got a portion in here that speaks to that the first person to be called is the person responsible for that property. And then if there's no action taken, then the next step occurs.
Yeah.
And they'll get there the next day and the people say, we didn't violate. It's got to be checked as it's called.
That's what I say, yeah.
But you're not coming from 50 miles away.
No, can't
That's
do
why
that.
you're going to, after hours, that's why you're going to call the policeman, because that's what we pay them for.
I have a question. Maybe this is already covered in one of our drafts, but I'm thinking if you're in a commercial area and you're on sewer, I'm concerned about this being applicable. Examples of what I'm concerned about is Cooper has those cabins on Kingsland. We have people building a bike shop with short-term rental stuff above it.
Cunningham Corners.
So, so now we're gonna say, suppose we say, okay, there's only 500 permits, and there's 462, people will rush out and get them. And then this guy who built the bike, sorry, you can't have a permit, we already have 500. Because a bunch of people, what we're worried about is people with houses next to somebody else's house. We're not worried about the bike shop having short-term, that's not a problem because it's in a commercial area, it's on sewer. Or what Cooper's been operating, it's in a commercial area, it's not,
Well, it's actually R2 where Cooper is.
I think
Over
it's
there. No, it's
zone
R2.
commercial.
but he's on sewer, but I think it's an R2, yes.
And the other place I'm kind of worried about, and maybe this all works out just as an example, the greens. here's a legacy place, it's been operating forever, it does short-term rentals, there's no problems, never has been operated, don't even know how long, at least 20 years probably. And so we're gonna everybody's gonna run out, get 500 permits, and we'll say, oh, well, no, you can't do that anymore, because we've run out of permits. That makes no sense.
Well, what's your recommendation?
Well, on those other guys, I think we could solve it by saying it doesn't apply to commercial, and they don't even count in the 500. And I don't know how to handle the green. I'm just raising it as an issue. I think.
Well, if we should ever some point in time have a business licensing ordinance, are we going to limit it to 500 businesses? Can't have any more than 500, that's it. No?
It's not the same conversation.
Not even close.
It's
Okay,
not.
why?
Hey, Jerry, are you going to support anything no matter what it is? Are you going to?
Am I going to support anything? Yeah, I'm going to support something. So are you suggesting I'm not?
Okay, let's,
You know,
I'm just
Hey,
curious.
hey,
No,
let's steer the conversation on the sewer side over to Richard. So I understand the 3 per bedroom, per septic, et cetera, et cetera. Now we do have some homes, and we, of course, businesses, I think all the businesses are on sewer. What's the recommendation if it's in 1,800 or it's a
Shaking your head the wrong way.
3-bedroom house?
Yeah, I don't see putting any limits on it based on, you know, the use of the sewer system. I mean, it can handle whatever you put it into it, I would think, as long as the pipe is big enough coming out of the building.
Yeah, it seems this is an ordinance that is being derived in order to protect our neighborhoods.
Right, right.
If we can, put boundaries around it so that it is addressing what happens in our R1 zones and maybe
We can
any other
exempt,
residential.
it would be very easy to exempt this whole mechanism from C zones, if that's what you
Well,
want to do.
I think that makes sense. We're only trying to solve for how do we protect our neighborhoods, not
Well,
how
it
do we
would only
protect,
apply to our zones. I mean,
Yes.
that may be,
Yes.
and exempt.
not how do we protect Casey's from their next door neighbor or.
Well,
from
there
your
are cities,
government.
I mean, you probably know, I assume other people have read a lot of other ordinances, but Fayetteville, oh my gosh, I don't even know how many different designations they have, different types of dwelling units, if you
Okay, I
will.
think Doug's got something.
Mayor, the international, I'll have to confirm this with our chief building official, but the International Fire Code does put a cap on occupancy based on square footage, so.
It's 1 per 200 square
Person
feet?
per 200 square feet, so if you've got a 1,600 square foot house and you're on sewer, 8 would be the max.
And commercial is
Well,
also-
sewer, sewer or septic.
Yeah.
That's just a flat occupancy, fire code limit.
Yeah, if you've got
It's not-
1,600 square feet and you put more than 8 people in there, it becomes a fire hazard.
It's not uncommon at all, but regardless of whether it's short-term rental, long-term rental, or home owner occupied, to have an occupancy cap in a residential zone of a certain amount. We don't have that, but it is very typical that cities would have these large extended families that would all be living in a home. This was a problem probably more than a dozen years ago in certain cities in northwest Arkansas. Basically it was a situation of extended family. Parents, 3 or 4 kids, grandparents, an uncle and an aunt, all staying in the same home. And they owned the home, and they were there all the time. So it wasn't, occupancy issues can come up outside of this whole short-term rental discussion, and that may be worthy of discussion separately as well. But that does factor, that's the
Mayor?
legacy issue.
Yeah,
Councilman Fowler asked me if I'm going to support anything here.
sure.
I think we've taken this thing, we've created a problem where we've created an additional problem where there weren't really a problem. We've got issues that need to be dealt with, but it seems like we're going overboard. We're going over-regulated. We're creating another regulation to deal with regulations that we already have.
Well, we don't have an occupancy regulation.
No, we don't have an occupancy regulation, but again, how are you going to enforce the occupancy regulation?
Well, commercial buildings have occupancy loads as well. This room, I think, is 99. The bike shop and the boutique hotel will have an occupancy limit on that building. Now, how the fire marshal goes about enforcing that, I'd have to get with him and ask him, but if you've got a room in that bike shop that's, they got 100 people in there and the max is 50, I think he could show up and write a citation on something.
And what, like in any other restaurant or whatever, there should be a plaque on the outside that says the maximum occupancy of this particular dwelling is however many.
Yep.
But still, yeah, the question is, how are you going to enforce that? I disagree today, I'll disagree tomorrow, and I'll disagree from now on. It is not the police department's duty or job to go knocking on doors and counting people in the house.
Well, who would go count people in a restaurant after overbooked?
Well, fire department.
Well, what's that difference between the fire department and police department as far as enforcement goes?
There's a lot of difference there's a lot of difference in enforcement. I mean.
Not really.
Well, does fire inspector have the arrest powers?
Yeah,
I don't know. If he does.
he does.
How do you know that?
I know he has citation, I don't know if it's about arrest.
Well, you're not going to arrest anybody else. You can give them a ticket and go from there. You're not taking them to jail or anything.
We've already got police and code enforcement. I really have resisted any effort to try to make fire officials people that cite into court as well. There definitely needs to be a discussion about whether it's code enforcement centric or police centric on how, but let me just remind the council, you all are the legislators, you determine what ought to be legal and illegal, and the mayor and the executive determine how to enforce it. And obviously, if it's not able to be enforced, that's something you all want to avoid, and I understand that's the discussion, but a lot of the granular detail is definitely something that would eventually be up to an officer on the street or to the mayor's instruction to that officer on how they're supposed to handle the situation.
Doug, did you want to chime in?
No, I was just thinking, I don't want to get hung up on this and just stuck on this and talk about it around in circles for, an hour or 2 hours. We need to move forward with some of the other points. It's understood that Councilman Snow has an issue with this. I understand that. It's fine. But we can't keep going around in circles forever.
Well, then what we need to do is take whatever we've got today, put it in the draft form, and then when it comes up, be on it again.
Right. So, point well taken. All right. Septic inspection, I think we're headed there. Well, John, I think, John brought up a valid point. If you have the bike shop, and if that's a C1 zone, no residential housing around it or anything, I don't know who it's really going to bother, right? So I think that's something worth thinking about. Now, whenever you talk about R2 zoning, which is the development, the Cooper development, where they have their multiple, that is R2, and it still is encompassed by residential zoning on three sides of it. So, and I don't even know, I haven't even seen how they're marketed, I'm not really sure, but I don't think that they would be marketed to many more than what they want the capacity to be. I'd have to look at that, I don't know. The greens, should that be considered different? Is that part of the townhouse authority?
They used to be timeshares, I think, at one point.
Is it?
I
I don't know what.
Yeah, they started out as a timeshare nationwide.
I think they're owned by
And
two
they're still
different
part of
people
it,
now.
they're still part of that
Grades 1 and
nationwide
grades
thing.
2.
But you can also rent by the night.
So here's what I think. I don't think we're going to figure those things out today. I think
Sure,
they're
for
worthy
sure.
of consideration. Do a little research, a little background, put a little thought into it, and see where we can land on that. Because we got a lot of time, right, till even our next city council meeting, work session even.
Yep.
So I'd like, not table it, I'm not saying officially table it, but
Needs more work.
I'm glad you brought it up.
Yeah.
Okay. So the septic permit,
Mhm.
Richard mentioned the other day, having short-term rentals, require having a pump every 4 to 5 years. I think that was the neighborhood of what you were talking, of what you mentioned.
Actually, what he said was a homeowner should pump it every 5 to 7 years. Then he suggested maybe the short-term rentals should pump it every year. And my reaction to that is it was too often.
Yeah, it may be, every year may be too often, for sure, but that's why I like the inspection idea. It's having it inspected more often, inspected initially and then inspected, even if you did it every 2 years, and have it checked. And then if the inspection was done, if it was part of the inspection to check the tank, to check the sludge level and the scum level in the tank, you could determine whether or not the tank needed to be pumped. So you wouldn't just automatically pump it, but you could at least inspect it and see if it needed it. Some of them may not, some of them may need it more frequently.
And I like this idea too, and Richard has been working on kind of a checklist for what that inspection should include. And it seems to me if somebody has their septic inspected, that would eliminate some of this occupancy side stuff. It is, they've got a healthy functioning septic system. We're not worried about that. Whatever they're doing, the frequency of their guests, the number of their guests, they're managing it well, and it's passing that inspection. Does that let us off the hook on some of these occupancy limits?
No, because you still got a fire code.
Well, to the fire code, that's a hard and fast rule out there. That already exists. That's not us creating a new law.
Can I add one more thing? You know, these water usage are estimates, because we don't really know. I mean, 8 people in one house may use twice as much water as 8 people in another house. It just kind of depends on the people and what they're doing. So that's why I think the inspection is really good. That's going to catch the ones that are actually having issues, and then the ones that are doing fine are going to be, great. You're not going to have any problems. But because we don't really know. We're saying these are estimated water usages. Some of them are going to be higher, some of them are going to be lower. And the only way to catch the ones that are on the outliers is to do those inspections periodically.
No, I don't think so. I've asked that question. Ask Richard.
What's that?
He's got the answer.
So we aren't septic inspectors. So you'd have to go to an outside third party?
Or, it's potential that if the people that already work here, if they're doing the other inspections, they could get a license. One of the licenses from the health department, that would qualify them to do that. It's difficult to get a designer's license, a designated representative license, that you have to have a degree, you have to have so many years' experience, or you have to be an engineer, plumber. You may have some of those qualifications, folks with those.
Similar to pipe?
Yeah, and she worked for the health department for years, so she became a registered sanitarian, and that qualified her. But you can get an installer's license, if we're gonna license those folks to do the inspections or allow them to do it. You can do those, there's also another license that's a certified maintenance provider. That's another license you could get from the health department. I think you have to have a Class 1 wastewater license for that. But there are different, you could go and get a certification from the health department. Members of your staff or whoever, could get that, and that would basically qualify them to do the inspections.
I think that kind of brings us to the point of determining whether these occupancy maximums that we have are us trying to manage a concern over septic, or is it us trying to protect the neighborhoods from having large groups come in on a regular basis? It's kind of, we had a straddle going there. We were gonna accomplish both of those objectives with occupancy limits. We don't address, if we allow somebody to say, I've got a pretty big house here and I market it to 14 people. If we allow them to say, well, as long as you bring us an inspection report that shows your septic is healthy, you're good to go. We don't handle that other side, which is protecting our neighborhoods from feeling like there's a big group every week, whatever the case may be, next door to me. So I think I like the idea of the inspection, because I think it takes this management of occupancies, police knocking on doors or whatever the case may be. I think it takes that out of play. But we might still have to factor in, how do we address the people in the neighborhood who say, it's not the septic, really. The septic seems to be fine. It's the fact that I've got this big group coming in every weekend.
Why don't we, dealing with the big groups, why don't we, when you identify the short-term rental, why don't we get an ordinance prohibiting parking, put up signs, no parking signs, no parking in the street signs in that particular areas?
We have ordinances for parking. And at the end of the day, it shouldn't make any difference as long as you're not messing up a driveway, a mailbox, or a fire hydrant.
You
But
can't
we
park
have
overnight
parking
on the street.
ordinances.
Right?
We already have that.
Signs, designating certain areas.
Well, then you're gonna have signs everywhere.
I'm sorry, Jason.
You can't, it's already ordinance that you can't park overnight on the street.
Right.
That's existing.
There's properties that have plenty of parking. That's not the problem.
Well, we got.
And we have plenty who don't have enough and end up parking illegally. We have ordinances against that today, so that's taken care of.
Some of our parking ordinances were developed some time ago when we had 15,000 people too, and we got narrow streets now with it.
We need to get any narrower. They're just narrow.
Do what now?
You're worried about parking on this. If the city doesn't have it covered, the state does.
I'd like to go back to protecting the community.
Yeah, but on the parking, I mean, we got narrow streets. Whether they got narrower or always been narrow, we got narrow streets that are more parking on those narrow streets now than it was 5 years ago, 2 years ago, 10 years ago. There are more parking on the streets.
I haven't seen it on my street.
I've seen it on several streets on the east side.
Garage
That's where I
sales,
live.
garage sale Saturdays.
I don't know if they have a garage sales at midnight, but my God, they need to, that's good for them.
Well, if they're doing it at midnight, then they're violating of city court.
I would say that the draft that Mr. Fatt, I think most of them have this, in fact. The place where parking is addressed in this short-term rental proposal is that we would require short-term rentals to have a minimum of 2 off-street parking spaces available on-site. So they can't rely on street parking. That may be 2 cars in the driveway.
2 in the garage?
But obviously you can have vehicles in the garage and the driveway, but they would have to be on-site, not on the street. And that's what's in this current, I think all 3 drafts of the short-term rental have that provision.
Okay, so let's go back to protecting the neighborhood.
Right.
The people.
Yeah.
Okay? It sounds as if we can, on the septic side, we might be able to control that. Because we've got a fire code and we've got an expert as well. 3 to a room or 200 square feet per person. What do we do with the sewer?
Well, I thought we had that equation as well. It was gonna be, now it would be, I guess, 3 per bedroom plus 2. 3 per bedroom plus 2.
You know, regardless, you take a hotel.
Regardless of whether it's sewer or
Yeah.
septic?
Yes.
Okay,
I
that's
mean,
fine.
you take a hotel, you get a king bed, you get 2 queens. It's 2 or 4 people.
Yeah.
You want another person in there, then you have to order like a roll-in bed. They may like to do that, but they're gonna charge you for it. But I'm just saying hotels have limits on occupancy per room. They just do. This is
The
no
difference
different.
between septic and sewer is the sewer has a bumper of +2 on the end of it. The septic doesn't have that. It was just 3 per bedroom.
Well, we're kind of allowing, we kind of came out with a way, if you will, to kind of allow, you know, instead of 2.
Okay,
we
so
could say
everybody
3.
can have 3 per bedroom +2?
No,
Oh,
no,
okay,
not
that's what I
on
was saying.
septic, not on septic.
That's
not on
what I
septic.
was just saying.
Yeah, what you said was right.
Okay.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's it.
I went over my head.
That's right. 3
So-
per bedroom on septic, and then on sewer, 3 per bedroom +2.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't work out, though. Take a 2-bedroom house, 1 on sewer, 1 on septic. Okay? 1 on sewer has 3 people per bedroom or six in the house.
Right?
Plus,
Just 2.
6 in the house plus 2, so that's 8 in the septic system?
Not in the septic. It's
No.
just 3
Sewer.
times
In the
2,
sewer.
6.
So is the sewer counted at 2 per bedroom or 3?
3 plus 2.
So it would be 8. So you'd have
6 on
8.
septic, 8 on sewer.
Okay.
Mayor,
So-
back to your point of, back to Steve's point of protecting the neighborhood. At what points have we got to hit to protect the neighborhood, to protect the neighbors?
Well, I think he impliedly brought up a question, is there a max number? You know, 3 per bedroom, if you have a 5-bedroom house, that's 15 people.
If you do, more than likely it's going to be on a larger property.
Yeah.
You're not going to have very many of those.
I don't know if we have many 5-bedroom septic systems in the city.
No.
Do we have any? We may have.
We have 1?
I think we have 1.
But if you're on
Is it a
sewer,
short-term rental, Taylor? It is, yeah.
so if you're on sewer, you could go, what, 17?
So 5
Because you have
times 3 is 15.
This one's septic, I think, 5-bedroom on septic.
Yeah.
If you have a 5-bedroom home.
And I
I'm
suspect.
just saying, if you're the person next door.
As I was
You're not gonna be
listening
that
to
happy
some of
about
the feedback we were
15
getting
people. I
last
don't
night,
think.
I get this impression that there may be one big property on Loch Lomond that's really causing heartburn. Am I the only one? Is that, did
Well,
anybody
that
else?
one is, but there are many others.
There are.
There's
On Lomond.
some truth
Yeah,
to
there's-
that,
Oh,
yeah.
Windsor, Lake Anne, Brittany. I mean, there's not any lake I haven't heard from
Just
yet.
so many of the people I heard from were, yeah, well, I live right next door to them, or I live right across the cove from them. And it sounded like there was a crew of people addressing one property.
Well, I
couldn't be
wrote
sure.
down the lakes. It was Brittany, Loch Lomond, and Windsor last night.
I could give you examples from all that might not have been there last night. Another thing that was brought up, you know, is it was in the proposal that Larry was writing. And that is, you know, limiting, you know, number of STRs on a street, right? Or on a cul-de-sac or whatever. But, I mean, I even actually had an STR owner, you know, mention, and everybody got the email. I don't know how many have read all the emails because there's been many of them. But eliminating sandwiching, right? There's a cul-de-sac. And, you know, it's like, well, it's only one cul-de-sac. Well, if you're the guy that lives on that cul-de-sac, right? There are 3 homes, side by side by side on a cul-de-sac. You know, and this gentleman, he's just miserable. And-
Because he's got
He's
short-term
sandwiched.
rentals, he's sandwiched.
Yes. So I mean, I could show you like a list of streets that have 3, have 2,
3 properties or 3
3
short-term
SDR,
rentals?
short-term
3
rentals
short-term.
on a street. Now, the street might be 40 houses long, and you
Yes.
might have one on one end
Right.
and one on the other. I haven't tried to dissect that one yet.
Right.
But, you know, the sandwiching, you know, where you've got like one on each side.
So that brings
No.
us to the realm of caps.
Yeah.
Not only caps for the city, but do we take it down caps per street?
Per street.
One has to do with the density or the frequency of the STR in the neighborhood or along a street,
Correct.
which is a little bit different than the cap, because it deals with density, not total number in your community.
Sure.
So,
Or you could do a
I
cap
think-
per lake. couldn't you?
I mean, we talked about that, right? So now you get into the realm of determining what's a lake property and what isn't, or what is a golf course property and what isn't, you know? That becomes a whole nother level of, you know,
one of the issues is that I think any one of us, we assume as a single-family property owner in the city, we can have a birthday gathering with all the in-laws and outlaws that we invite over, the neighbors and friends. And so there's no limitation about doing that. And so I think a resounding resistance by the SDR folks is that they feel they should be allowed to have gatherings like that at their facilities too. And frankly, I have to agree with them, but they can't stay there overnight if they exceed the capacity allowance. But, you know, can they have a birthday gathering, a wedding reception?
And how do you enforce it?
And as long, well, the enforcement is noise, parking, those kinds of things. You know, you can have 40 people there, some of them in the yard, some of them in the house, but you can't have 20 cars out in front. You can have,
I will tell you that that's going to be a big fat no from residents that live around the homes. They're not going to support that. And I think a lot of short-term rental owners, I don't know that they support that either. It just doesn't make any sense. These are short-term rentals. They're for weekend stays, you know, to come with your family and things like that. They're not party houses. You know, if you want to have a party, you know, there are a lot of other facilities around that are built to have, you know, accommodate situations like that. So
That's a tough one to enforce too, though, isn't it? I mean, what constitutes a party? Is it the first can of beer that gets opened up, or is it the first birthday cake, or is it the balloon?
it comes back down, like you said, Steve, to marketing. You know.
Yeah, how do you market it? Yeah,
Yeah,
again.
you can't market it like
I'm
that.
game. to
And like
try
in
to-
this,
Evolve.
on but whatever I read, it's right in the contract. There's no additional capacity allowed over what the property is marketed to, essentially, period.
Jason,
Sir?
I rent a 3,000 square foot house for the next 12 months. And I advertised that 3,000 square foot house as for parties, receptions, weddings, whatever you want to.
You're gonna have a zoning problem if you do that. I mean, if you're running a party facility, a zoning, I mean, I'll let Taylor address that, but we do have some uses in the code. If it was only used as a wedding venue, then I think they would be violating the conditions of the R1 zone, assuming they're in R1, and they couldn't operate. They couldn't do it. They'd be violating the zoning ordinance, and we could shut that down. If it was exclusively for that. Someone lived there and they had their friends over, or they were leasing it for overnight accommodation, but they were going to have a wedding ceremony in the living room, that's not going to be an issue. And according to this draft, if you can't exclusively market a short-term rental for parties or weddings. The language in there listed receptions and other wedding-related parties, corporate meetings, or similar activities, only for overnight accommodation.
And I will tell you, we're Bella Vista, we can do whatever we want. You know, we're writing this ordinances between us. That is standard. I don't care what city.
No parties and short-term rentals.
Yeah, right. I mean, again, I go back to, these are single-family residential homes and neighborhoods. They're not designed to have, now, you know, if I've got, you know, my neighbor Joe and she wants to have a birthday party and have people, well, you know
Yes.
Joe, right?
Right.
You know Joe. And
That's okay.
you know these are friends coming over, they're gonna play cards or they're gonna do whatever, they're gonna be there for 2 or 3 hours and then everybody's gonna leave and go home. Well,
They
nobody
may
has a
even
problem
invite
with
you.
that.
Maybe they would.
Yeah.
You know, yeah.
Just so they don't
Depends
have
how
to
many
play
play cards.
Have a piece of cake or whatever.
Poker.
That's different. You know your neighbors. You know, you know what they're
Yeah.
doing. You know each other.
I totally
So-
get that. I'm okay with that wording. If that wording works in other communities, that's fine by me, but I have heard from a short-term rental operator in Bella Vista who said, you know what, I rent a room, but I have a beautiful backyard, and I've had on occasion a couple that wants to get married back there. And, you know, I don't think anybody gives a darn. It seems like it's probably okay. It's not that there are going to be 40 people there, but that's kind of how we get into this ciphering, you know, what's allowed and what's not allowed. If we say weddings are not
Yeah,
allowed,
that's
I
probably a
can't
one-off.
marry the two. It is a
short-term
one-off.
rental. If you're going to do that, now you said if it's the owner of the home and it's their room and they want to do that, okay. And you know what? Maybe even a short-term rental owner that has a house and says, hey, I have a couple, but you kind of say, hey, neighbors, this is going to take place this afternoon. They're just going to be here for a couple hours and let them know. Well, I don't even know. Okay, this is on the side. You don't have to tell everybody.
Don't tell
everything,
anybody,
right?
yeah.
But
Just get them married and get them on the road.
yeah,
I think the key is that you can't market it for that purpose.
Yeah.
Is that, I
Yeah.
think that's
You can't
the key.
market it.
Fair enough.
I don't think
Can I
you should-
add-
I don't
can I add
think you
one
should
thing?
prohibit it from being, occurring there, like you would in a neighborhood with all single-family houses.
Mr. Keller?
I just want to remind everyone that this is beyond our regulatory power, and that's what we're here to talk about. But people are not helpless in these circumstances, even if we don't adopt an ordinance. If their neighbors are creating a nuisance, be it by short-term rentals or parties or noise or whatever, and they're rendering their neighbor's life intolerable in that house, they can sue them all day long. And those people are liable for nuisance, and they can be enjoined and stopped. That's just basic law. That's equitable principles of law. They can go do that. So it's not all up to us, or they have no remedy. I want to make sure now that costs money and it's attorneys and it's time and that's not an excuse for us not to step in and do what we need to do. But I want you to know they're not helpless.
okay. So if we get back, I think a couple things. If we just talk about, we could probably walk away today, and we've got enough that we can massage this ordinance back to kind of like a consensus of what we heard.
We don't have a
okay?
cap.
That's what I was getting ready to say. There are like two things. The permit fee, do we set a number or do we do it based upon occupancy to make it proportional? What do you think, right? So like I mentioned, 5 people, and we're gonna have to get back to John's point. We will take homes with a room or a space. I think they break that out in the Granicus. I think they identify those homes. It isn't very many. It's a very small number. But if we take out the bicycle shop with the places up above, if we take out the greens, for instance, for whatever reason, if we can, I've got to look at what I mean, when I say I have to, I'm not going to be a determining factor. I just want to know how it's zoned. I don't know, right? And it kind of stands alone if that's a different type of a situation.
Yeah, I don't know either.
Right, so we'll have to look at those things. Maybe those numbers come out of the cap. So, but what I'm going back to is 500, let's just say an average of 5. An average of 5 occupancy. I don't know what it is. That's a low number probably. You're talking 125 grand at 50 per head count. So is that too much? You know, too, and I'd ask you to do this, go back and look at our permit fee schedule and you can see what we charge for other permits. $50 a head count is not out of the realm versus what we charge for a lot of other things for permits, okay? So, and two, you know, Doug made a really great point when we were talking. If you're, you know, say $50 or $75, I think what we don't want to do is have the permanent residents of Bella Vista have to pay for the inspections that, you know, what it's going to cost, you know, these short-term rentals. The short-term rental owners should foot that bill because they're the ones operating the business. Because that is what it is. It's a business.
But I would, I guess, take a little deference to that, and it's a fallacy of most governments, local, county, state, and federal, is that they have a revenue-generating program, and they ignore the revenue when they talk about the cost of how do we manage it. So I think some of the revenue that we're going to appreciate, and we have been appreciating, needs to offset some of the cost of this program. It's not 100% so that permits are free, because I think there's some additional things that we need to do that we wouldn't ordinarily have to do.
So you're talking the sales tax?
I'm talking about the sales tax revenue. That goes into our general coffers. So it's a general revenue. It's a benefit to the city and all of the residents here. So some of that, as most governments do, when they look at how are we going to manage this program and the costs it's going to cost us, they ignore the revenue side that is being generated. And so I'm saying is that we shouldn't base the fee on what it's going to cost us to manage this.
You don't really have to break even on the fee, because
Right.
the real
Exactly
action's
right.
in the
I hear
sales
that.
tax.
My
That's what it
proposal
amounts
was
to.
125 the first time, and then 75 for any renewals.
I hear that. And,
You know?
and also, I thought, we were also talking about making some adjustments in the frequency of the health and safety inspection that might soften kind of the cost side, the staffing side. I heard clerk and I heard inspector. Was it one of each we were trying to fund?
Yes, because the clerk would be a new hire.
Okay. So I think that's one of the arcs that we've seen in regard to our conversation around these proposed ordinances, is we started off thinking that there doesn't need to be any new staff. We've come to understand, as we've thought about it, and this is normal during the course of consideration and figuring things out, we've come to understand that we think we need a clerk and an inspector if we're going to do this stuff on an annual basis. But if we could push out some of the health and safety inspections. In fact, I want to go back one more time and just kind of make sure everybody thinks that's a necessity. But if we did soften it and just say, we're not going to do 500 in the first 90 days. We're going to do 500 over the next 3 years. We will draw out of a lot and say the first third of the permits are going to require an inspection this year, the next third next year, the next third the year after that. That way we spread it out. We don't have this intense need for 500 health and safety inspections up front.
No,
Having said
I
that.
got a problem with that.
Okay, hold that
Okay.
just for a second. I'll make my final point with health and safety inspections. Are we sure we haven't created something there, a solution for a problem that doesn't exist? Of all of the feedback that we've gotten from residents, I don't think I've heard anybody say, you know, I'm really concerned that they don't have a handrail next door. I don't know that I don't know that that needs to be there. I'm willing to compromise if we can spread them out. We don't just go, gangbusters after 500 inspections.
So,
But
you know,
if are we sure that health and safety inspections
Relative.
we're being asked
I
to
think
address
that might
that.
be part of the fire code, I'm not sure, but there's some things about occupancy and rental spaces in the fire code. But the thought is that the approach that I took on that is that allow the homeowner to do that. Turn in the inspection report, they got the checklist, it either passes or it fails. If it fails, then they fix it, turn in a second report that says I pass, and then we can process their application. But within the first year, or the first period that it's open, whether we
Right.
have a 2-year permit, a 1-year permit, during that first 1 or 2 years of the permit period, then CDS does a follow-up inspection
Could be anytime.
anytime
in the
during that
course,
period, but it
yeah.
has to be done before the renewal.
So they
date.
do a self-inspection first?
They do a self-inspection first.
Are you comfortable putting your name on the license and issuing a business license to a home where most of the complaints we heard were noise on the deck, without anybody from their staff ever putting their eyes on that deck?
So the deck collapses. who's
Well,
got
but
the
that's part of that
liability?
inspection checklist. The owner says whether
No,
it's got
no,
to...
But I'm
I mean,
hearing
the
that
owner
some
of
of
the
the
property,
property
the
won't
home.
get inspected
The owner of the
after the
home.
first year.
What?
I'm hearing that some of those won't get inspected until after the first year.
Well, but the owner is certifying that it's there, or they're having someone do it for them.
Oh, I didn't hear that.
The owner could have their agent do it, as an example. If they have someone managing the property, they might be doing it to turn it in.
I mean, are we going
Somebody's
to,
got to turn in the paperwork.
are we going to inspect the decks of every home? So I mean, somebody has a party at their house and the deck falls down, I mean,
Yeah.
what's it,
Well,
what's
We're not
it?
issuing a license, a business license to owner-occupied, single-family residence, family. We're issuing a business license to
We're issuing a short-term rental
Lodging.
permit, not a business license.
So are we
Short-term
having
rental.
We're giving
one
them permission to
inspection or
run a business.
ongoing?
No, it's initial inspection. The ongoing would be on the septic systems, but
Yeah.
so what I heard was like every year would be too often. I don't disagree with that. Every other year, potentially, every third, but at minimum, you need to put your eyes on that home one time, at minimum, to look at the deck, make sure those smoke alarms are there, the fire extinguishers, just get your eyes on the electric to make sure that there has something been going on goofy with the wiring. But to your point, yes, I have heard from a lot of people that they're concerned with some of these homes because they've been lived in for 30 years, they've never been touched, nothing's ever been done to them. And plus the townhomes.
Yeah.
The townhomes are like a huge issue with people.
Well, the irony of this all, I mean, I'm fine, I guess, with having one inspection, but long-term rentals are a way bigger inspection problem than short-term rentals. Because of the reviews, the market's regulating short-term rentals. If it's falling apart, you're not gonna get the reviews, you're not gonna get customers. Long-term rentals are a disaster waiting to happen. You can have just a piece of junk and just be a cheap old landlord and just leave it that way.
It happens.
Supposedly
We
there are.
initially had a conversation when I was very first elected about a property maintenance ordinance, right? That I spent, oh my God, I spent so much time on that. Went up to New Hope, Minnesota, spoke to all their personnel, but it didn't just have to do with short-term or just long-term. It was your permanent housing stock. Every time a home was vacated, well, I should say this, a transaction took place, even if it was just, between this owner to a new owner, that home gets inspected every single time, regardless of what. Property type, rental, not rental, whatever it is.
It's standard in some states.
Yeah, and they have a whole program in Minnesota to support it. But I hear you on the long-term rentals, but right now, that's not what we're talking about
Yeah,
or dealing
I
with.
agree.
That's not what we're getting, all of the feedback on. And I'm supportive of doing something with long-term rentals because I agree with you. That's one of the things that, quite frankly, spurred me on to run. I was looking around Bella Vista going, oh my gosh, we've got a huge housing issue with some of our housing in Bella Vista.
Yeah.
But that's a whole different thing to try to.
So do we have consensus that initially there has to be a home inspection? As
For
part of
me-
the permitting process?
I'm just,
My part of that, I mean, Doug was looking like he was giving them up to a year to get it. My position would be, we pick a date, we're gonna start this. Everybody throws their information in, and then we start worrying about inspections. But we only give them 90, 120 days, 6 months to get it done. If you don't have it done in 6 months, you've lost your initial fee and you go back to the other end of the line. If you can't get it in 6 months, you shouldn't have to worry about it. If you get it in 6 months, you're all set to go. But we can't let it run and let these people home free for a year or two. Put a cap or a date on when you have to have it done by. 6 months ought to be plenty, especially then we're getting into the fall and winter season when it shouldn't be a problem to get inspectors and stuff, and they'll have more time because the rental numbers are going to be down, except for Thanksgiving, Christmas, and a couple other times. But put a cap on how long you have to comply. And then if you don't comply, you literally come off the list and go back to square one and start over.
But the bottleneck is
If you
not-
comply, then you're effective, well, from when you paid your permit in the first place.
Right, the bottleneck, though, is not on the part of the short-term rental operator. The bottleneck is on the part of the city being able to administer those inspections.
Right.
Would it be possible, Doug, for us to hire somebody on a temporary basis so that it's not, we're only going to need this person as long as it takes to get these inspections done. And then we're not going to keep doing it every year.
Why can't those licensed home inspectors that you mentioned first, why can't they do it? I mean,
I think they're inundated right now with
Sales.
real estate inspections as it is.
Thanks, Richard.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There are inspectors, and we have one on staff that does contract inspections. But hiring a temporary inspector could be a challenge. I think where we need a staff person, it would be for the application processing, permit issuing, inspection scheduling, but, you know, we have.
More the in-office function.
We have 3 code
Higher
officers
records to keep track.
and 4 building inspectors that can assist with these inspections.
They have the bandwidth to do 500 inspections in 90 days?
Well, I mean, the initial could be a challenge, but I'm saying, once that levels out,
Yeah.
processing them down the road, we could do those.
I think initially you may want to go 120 days.
Yeah, give them enough time. We're the bottleneck, not the short-term rental.
I think desirably, we don't want all of the permits to come due on the same date. One of the
Exactly right.
suggestions that came to us is we have them due on March 1st or April 1st.
That's right.
I think the reality is you want those scheduled, scattered throughout the year, and maybe you draw a ticket out of a hat every time you process one and say, okay, what's the expiration date going to be here? It's going to be 1 to 5 months added, and so
It's too complicated.
you
Well,
put
you could
that on
say the
the end.
first 100 get their permit good for 15 months or 18 months. That way they're not back in there in
Right.
12, they're back in there.
Once again, this is something, like, especially Fayetteville, we know, they had to make adjustments as they got into this, they moved down the road, because they didn't know really what they were going to be facing. So, once again, if we need to, we have the ability to make some adjustments as we move forward with
If
this.
you set a date and you realize that people are not gonna be able to comply, you can pass another ordinance and extend it. You could, you know.
It's not unusual. I mean,
That's,
it's
it would be entirely understandable and reasonable, and, you know.
Did we ever get the price hammered out?
I think 50, if it's a 6-person occupancy, then at $50 a person, that's $300. I think that's excessive.
Unless you make it for 2 years.
Well, I think the renewal on a yearly basis after you do the first one, I think it's going to be fairly rubber stamping, is it not?
Well,
What are you going to require to
You need to do
renew?
a permitting. If you put a cap, you have to do the permitting every year because you have to know what your number is.
Right.
I think the permit fee could be adjusted after the first year. If too much is coming in to pay for staff, then you can certainly adjust it, but you've got to determine whether you want the whole city paying for the program or the short-term rental owners.
Well, I'm thinking that
If
the
you- I
program
mean,
should.
you ultimately got to approve the budget. I mean, if it doesn't pay for itself, then my CDS budget goes up and you can either.
In that regard, aren't there general fund monies that are allocated to CDS though?
Sure.
Sure, but this is a special program, I think should fund itself.
Well, and the argument
if you
is
build
that
a
they're
house,
generating revenue to the
you
city
pay for the
coffers. Some of that
inspections.
money should be diverted
Well,
into that
and
fund.
that's what you mentioned
Yeah,
before, sure.
I think that's the fairness of it all.
But it's trying to figure out what that is.
So if you have.
But it's probably mathematically,
So
we should be
take,
able to calculate it.
so if you take a two-bedroom house, we're saying that the capacity of a two-bedroom house is 3 per bedroom, that's 6 plus 2 spares, that's 8 people. So what's the cap gonna be for the 8 people? So if you take $25, that would be $200.
I
$10 would be.
personally, I prefer to have a flat fee and not be changing the fee depending on how many people. You're just making things complicated.
Yeah, just a flat fee.
Yeah, it's just $100 or
And
whatever.
Jason, in the permitting part of the ordinance, we wrote as needs to be set or can be set.
It sets an
Well,
initial
that's
permit fee.
that's automatic
Well,
in there.
hold on, what's it say?
It sets an initial permit fee or such other amount as may be set from time to time by resolution of council.
So we set
So
it,
of course, you can reduce it, increase it by resolution at any time you get ready.
so
Okay,
what's the
so it's
number?
solvable. It'll just take some work.
Can I, what is the going rate per night on an Airbnb in Bella Vista? Does anybody know?
Depends on the occupancy. If it's 4 occupancy, it's probably 100 to 150. If it's 10 occupancy, it's $500, $600, $700.
Per night?
Grant just gave
Well-
us around 150.
Well, here, let's
That's
let
per
someone
Would you say
speak.
it is?
It's 160.
For 10 people?
What's that?
Average.
Oh, average,
Yeah, average across all rentals is 160.
okay. She just seemed to know, so,
Is it per night?
yes.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
See, we just asked her a question. You have an Airbnb, I'm assuming?
Yes.
Okay, just on an average, say for the year, how many days do you think you are occupied?
For Bella Vista, for the entire city, we average about 60% occupancy.
60?
Yep.
All year?
60 to 65
Okay.
all year long.
Okay,
Out of 365 days.
Correct.
right, out of a year, but they're not full all the time,
Right.
is what my point is.
So anyway,
Do you find that true of the larger houses as well?
So there is a season for all size houses. So your smaller houses are going to do better at different times versus your larger houses. But the stats I just gave you is just a real rough estimate of everybody's. The same information that he speaks about Granicus is available to all of us. It's just software data. This is something that I provide to a lot of investors all the time. So I know these numbers really, really well. But they definitely go up and down. So in the summertime for your bigger houses, you're going to see a lot of, you're going to have more occupancy, you're going to have bigger crowds, and that's going to dwindle in the winter, and so it's just going to go up and down. And then, of course, market changes and stuff like that will affect it as well.
Quality of the accommodation affects the.
Absolutely.
That's pretty obvious.
I like the idea of a cycle of 2 years, and that is just so that we stay out of this, well, it's time to go back, it's time to, years pass pretty quick nowadays. If we could do it for 2 years at $75 a year, that's $150 up front. I like the idea of saying your health and safety inspection will be due before your renewal. We have 2 years, the city has 2 years, the short-term rental operators have 2 years to get their first inspection. You will not get a renewal without a health and safety inspection. 2 years, $150. To me, that makes sense. It keeps us all out of a grind, of an annual grind of renewing these permits and whatever may come with
Unless you
it.
take care of your big, all of a sudden, everybody hitting you.
Yeah.
You didn't have much time.
Why can't the homeowner, or the property owner, why can't they get their own inspection? I mean, if it's, as long as it's done by a licensed inspector. I mean, they got so much time, and,
I brought that up a while ago.
Yeah.
Not everybody liked the idea, but if we create the checklist and say, this is what has to be inspected, then any home inspector, it seems to me, could take that up and be available to a short-term rental operator to say, I'm available to do your inspection.
well, or as I said, the short-term rental operator can find that person. They can go out and source that person to do
Yeah,
their
and that
inspection.
person's reputation, professional reputation is on the line, just like it is when they get hired to do a health inspection.
Probably $150. I wouldn't go do one for less than $150.
That would be then between the property owner and the inspector.
That gets the city out of the need to hire somebody and try to work with the peaks and valleys of inspection demand.
so would these guys or people, whoever they are, have to register with the city and be approved?
I mean, you'd probably want us to verify that they're registered with the State Home Inspection Board. If if that's who you want to do it.
Yeah, is that a requirement of all people who are doing home inspections in Bella Vista today? It'd be no different than, I don't think, I don't know if you guys check those people?
No, that's a private transaction. We don't check those.
Okay, I see. You-
That's not required.
Isn't this a private
Real estate
transaction? I think that's
transaction
the
is not
purpose,
required.
that's the purpose of us turning it over to the private side, so that it is a private agreement between a short-term rental operator and a home inspector.
Well, you want somebody that's qualified, though, licensed and qualified to do it.
A licensed home inspector.
And what
would
Doug
be.
is talking about is that they would validate the current licensing of that individual,
They don't do that today for home inspections in Bella Vista.
because it's not an issue. It's a private issue.
This is
becomes-
private also.
well,
It's the
city-
operator.
The city has no control over those inspections for home sales, which is where you have the home
If you have a
inspection.
permit, you're turning
No,
it into.
This is different than that.
We have a checklist, you think, that comes from the government, therefore,
Well, we have a checklist that needs to be turned in, and we would have our people sign it. They're certified.
all right, I like the idea of it, it may not.
I mean, but I think if they're a.
Private sector can generally do it
Yeah.
as effective or as efficient as the
I
government,
would
right?
agree with
think
you. I would
most
agree
of
with
us
you. Yeah.
Subscribe to that.
We will still need a clerk, however, to oversee it.
What do you guys think of two-year permitting process, every 2 years versus one? They said the only thing that it could cause issues, now we gotta talk about the cap. That's kind of like the last thing, right? So where are we on a cap? If you have a cap, you're gonna have to have the ability to keep count of what's out there.
Yeah, no matter what, no matter how long.
And people that drop off in that year or two, could be within 2 years, there could be availability, if you're at your cap, but they're not gonna be able to apply for a permit because.
Until that permit expires, right?
Right, in 2
Whether
years.
it's operating or not.
In 2 years.
Yeah, the cap is on the permit.
Because you could have 50 short-term rentals drop off, but we wouldn't know it.
Here's a question, Doug.
Yeah.
If you have a cap and you sell your STR, are you off, does that drop off then?
Yes.
You're off the list?
Yep, you have to
So
whoever
it
buys the
doesn't
house.
go with
No,
that.
it does not.
But that doesn't mean that whoever buys the house is gonna turn it into an STR. They may buy it for
Exactly.
personal residence.
But the point is, if you're at the max, whoever buys the house may not be able to have an STR.
That's
If
correct.
somebody drops off or dies or whatever.
That's correct.
Well, but you got,
That's the only reason I asked, it affects values.
And that's written into the ordinance.
if a person quits having an STR, then they gotta be turning in their permit.
Yeah, then they drop off, yeah.
Then there's one available then.
Yeah.
There's no requirement to turn it in or to tell them
So
you're not gonna.
were you thinking
operate.
there'd be a waiting list? I mean, if we did hit the cap?
I don't know. I don't know what it's gonna look like in the future.
Depends where you set your cap.
Yeah, I think if you set your cap at 500, there's going to be not only a waiting list, there's going to be a rush for permits for people who were considering doing it. Here's how I thought about the cap, and I thought about it a long time. And I don't like the idea necessarily of having to have a cap, but hearing from the residents, I think that's one of their concerns, is that not where we are today. It's not like we're overrun today, we're not. The people we hear from, by and large, are people who live next door to one. And that could be a problem if you have a short-term operator who's not responsibly operating their property. But if I think in the future, if I try to look down the road, what might being overrun look like? And to me, I was thinking of a cap in the neighborhood of 750. And the way I got that number is, we're told by the POA we have 15,000 rooftops today. 15,000. Somebody said 13,000 last night, I think, the POA's number. They've got a pretty good cap, 15,000. That at 750 would never have, in Bella Vista, we would never have more than 1 in 20 homes as short-term rentals. Never. And that would allow the free market. We may never get there. There may never be 750. But that gives the free market time, a place to work. What does Bella Vista need? We don't have hotels. What's the right number for Bella Vista? But to know on the high end, there will never be more than 1 in 20 homes operated in Bella Vista as a short-term rental. That's how I got to 17.
So you got 5%.
5%. We're at,
So if you
we're
have-
at 3.3% today. That gives us some room to grow. Doesn't cap it. I mean, if we're going to cap it at 500, we're practically there now. And it seemed odd to me that on the one hand, we've got the A&P over here driving demand for more short-term rentals, more guests to come to Bella Vista. And then on the other hand, we're capping it right where we are
We're not
today. We
trying
don't
to
need
drive
both of
more
those.
short-term rentals, okay, let's rephrase that.
Well, we're trying to drive
We're-
demand
Yeah.
for short-term rentals.
But we're not,
No, you gotta
we're not in the
come
business
come
of
visit
like
us.
saying we need to build more short-term rentals.
No, I know that, but we are, that's their purpose, is to get people to come to Bella Vista.
To fill what
And
we
when
have
they-
now, you
yeah.
know, and to spend their money. It's restaurants, it's,
Yeah,
you know, enjoying our short-term rentals.
right.
Enjoy our amenities,
Right.
you know, it's a variety, it's a multitude of things.
But if we're gonna cap it at 500, I think we're saying, you know what? We got there. Bella Vista has been discovered, and now the flow is coming, the guests are here, we've got what we want, and we don't want any more.
So Larry, in his, I think he proposed 400.
4%.
4%, that's 600 of 15,000. So,
And it's something that will climb, then, as the number of houses we have goes up too.
What if you
Oh,
grandfather?
so you're
You
saying
can't do it as a
4%, you're not
4%
saying
total.
600?
And then,
Yeah.
and the other thing was the density, in other words, how frequently can you have these? Can you have, and so I prohibited, if you have 6 or fewer lots on the street, you can't have any. But then as you go down a street that has more than 6 lots on it, you go, for every 10, I said you could have 2 houses. Now, one of the proposals that was submitted last night was 2 out of 14
Yeah.
lots.
Larry, before we get too granular in that, let's try to cover the aggregate number,
Right.
and then we'll dive into, is
Yeah,
there a
the
way
density-
we can?
density
Yeah,
part of
yeah,
it.
yeah, the
Yeah.
density.
And 4%, I think, overall, long-term, is a number that's valid, I think, today.
That's 1 in 25, right? As opposed to 1 in 20. 4% or 5% is kind of where
Right,
you and
yeah,
I are at.
yeah.
well, for every 500 homes, you'd be allowing 20 more
Yeah.
at our current build rate, like right now. I mean, that's a smaller number, it's easier to kind of get your arms around. Taylor, didn't we like talk about a kind of a percentage for cities that put a cap that is, and again, it's not to say we have to do the same thing, but just some guidelines?
What do you mean, like how you base what you base?
Well,
the cap on?
don't some cities have a percentage? They set a percentage of your
Fayetteville
housing.
is the only one I think that has a percentage, is 3%. And they base it off the US Census housing unit data. Is what they base it off of, so it'll change in 10 years, but for that 10 years until it changes again, they base their percentage off of that.
Okay.
So their number was what, 3%?
3% max.
What do you mean US housing data? That's the percent for the whole US?
So the US Census for Fayetteville specifically, they use their housing unit
Oh,
data from
okay. I
Fayetteville
see what you
to get their cap.
I don't think at 1 in 20 houses, we've overrun or changed the dynamic of Bella Vista. I don't think that's excessive. I think it gives the free market room to work. I think it protects people who said, you know, I'm building a house right now, I'm not ready, I can't get a permit for it today, but I want that opportunity 6 months from now or 9 months from now. I think it gives us room to grow, and I don't think it threatens Bella Vista to think that we might have 1 out of 20 homes in the future.
If you're on a lake, where do you think those short-term rentals, a lot of people are targeting?
Yeah, but the
Lakes,
cap's not gonna
golf
change
courses,
that. Yes,
short-
yes.
So what's happening is you're talking about 120, it's not spread equally across Bella
Well,
Vista.
that's where we have the
That's where
density.
your
right?
density factor will.
Yeah.
Or trails would be another.
Yeah, right. I mean, like I said, I could support more, but just to say a blanket number, I mean, all these additional ones, I know where they're gonna go. A lot of them, right? They're gonna go to a lot of the Cherry properties in Bella Vista, and they're gonna take them off the market for long-term residents that would like to move here and live here.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, that's just kind of the way it works. They're more valuable. I mean, it
Those
attracts
are-
more visitor, more business.
A prime choice in terms of rentals too.
What is the economy doing to your bookings now? Anything? Are they up, down, even?
Oh, they're definitely down across the entire United States. And then we'll continue to go down.
So do we want to go down the density road? As
I
Larry's
don't,
proposing?
just personally, I just don't like that at all.
It'd be hard
The
to
density
manage.
side.
Well, not only, but it's just, you know, you're taking away the privilege. It's my house, I can do with it what I want. All of a sudden, no, you can't. No, you can't. And it's just too bad you have a nice house in a nice neighborhood and circumstances come up and I gotta flip it to the other and you can't do it because we got an ordinance. And I got a real problem with density. You know, if we're gonna put a cap on it, that'll take care of itself, I think.
Where are you at on the cap, Jim? What feels right
I
to
can go
you?
with, you know, I'd much rather stay at 5, but I can go with 6 or 750. I can go with that. You know, I'm flexible on the cap. You know, and one thing, you know, we haven't talked about at all is progress. It's all part of growing up. All these little things that are popping up at us all the time, those are all parts of growing up, and we need to adjust. And we need to remember that today ain't gonna be like next week. We need to think about that, but we're no longer the nice, quiet retirement village. You know, and a lot of people don't want to admit it, but we are literally a bit, a bedroom community. And that's what it is.
So-
There's no place to put anything, you know, hotel-wise to bring that in, so we're gonna have these for the revenue. But I got a real problem with density. As far as how many we have, you know, 600, 750, that part doesn't bother me, because like somebody said last night, the market will take care of itself if there's too many.
So-
Jerry, where are you at on the cap?
Oh, I think the 600 or 750, I don't see a problem with that.
Do you feel like there ought to be a cap?
No, I think the market will take care of the cap. I mean, I think the market will take care of that, but
Well, we don't want to
John,
turn
what do you
into, what
think?
was the name of that place up in
Man,
Colorado?
so here's what I will tell you. You read enough ordinances about all these different cities, and what's happened is they didn't wake up soon enough, okay? Steamboat Springs,
That's it.
Sedona, Arizona, even places like Seattle, Portland, Oregon, I could go on and on and on.
Right.
And what's happened is they've moved in so fast, they happen so quickly.
Right.
And I'll tell you right now, you gotta think, you talk about the future and progress, you know, I'm a progressive guy. I mean, my wife and I said we're fortunate we're able to travel. We stay in short-term rentals
Democrats.
a lot, right? What's that?
Democrats.
Yeah, no, I just don't go down that road, but don't label me. So, we utilize them, so we're kind of like pretty aware. And what's happening here, and I think people know this, and I don't want to speak out of turn on it, but we know a lot of property's been bought up in Bella Vista. At some point, a trigger's gonna get pulled, and things are gonna happen, they're gonna happen here fast. It's gonna cause a lot of additional influx,
Right.
more than likely,
Well, that's why.
a short-term
Yeah, we're
rental
saying the same
market.
thing.
And
We're all
gonna-
saying that. I
And
think.
we're gonna get inundated just like that.
Well, that's why we would put a cap in place. We're just
Right.
trying to figure out where that cap is. Can I just poll John and kind of find out where he's at? Well, I
Sure.
think everybody's weighed in.
I need to think about it. I see 500 to 750, somewhere in that range. I understand that.
or if you base it on, on a population, but you, like I said, you object to density, but,
Well, it's
My
hard to
space
gauge
on
the population.
Housing units,
I mean, the housing unit, and not population, but the housing units.
You know, the
Census
percentage, yeah.
You got, you know, 1 in 20? Was that what your number?
mine's 1 to 25.
1 in 25? I mean, that sounds like a reasonable number.
Or-
That would never exceed that.
We're between
Even
6
even if things
640
got crazy,
As an
like.
example,
like
640
they
or
might.
750 is really where the range is if you're looking at today.
So you add another 500 houses, another 500 houses are added to the city. I mean, then you're increasing it by,
20.
you're increasing the number by, you can add 20 more. That sounds reasonable to me, maybe not, but that sounds reasonable.
So, right, 4% is 600. That's what it is. If it's based on 15,000.
Right.
And then if, I don't even know, what was our total new build last year?
600 and, no, it was 581, Doug?
Under 6.
New homes
New home permitted last year.
last year?
Almost
581? Almost 600.
611.
It was 6.
So this, was it 611?
Yeah.
Yeah, so,
So it'd be 24 new ones, you did 600.
Yeah, Jason was saying you can't, he doesn't like the idea of going by percent. You
Well,
need a
I
fixed
mean,
number.
if it's a percent of the fixed number, like
How
Taylor
fixed?
said, the housing unit data from the last, the 2020 US Census or something.
Yeah.
But your number's not gonna change for 10 years.
Okay, yeah.
And, I mean, if,
Not gonna happen in
So the
10 years.
50,000
well,
is the water
to your
meters.
point.
But
I
you
mean,
could-
so I think it's preferable to have a hard number just for everyone to keep track, okay, there's 600 of them.
Yeah.
That's the number.
But
And then, of
what
course,
is-
you can change that number. You're not
Yeah.
locked in forever and ever, amen. You can adopt an ordinance and the next month that increases it by 100.
Yeah.
Right
You
now,
always can do that.
current short-term rental owners are covered. Nobody's denying them anything, right?
Right.
We know we're at 462 at least.
Right.
That's where we are right now. Supposedly, here's some short-term rental owners, some people are kind of dropping out of the market. Some people are coming on board. We don't really know that for a fact. That's the word. So, and two, we're gonna take a few out of it, with the homes with a room and space, so that'll kind of take the number down a little bit. So, I will I mean, a lot of people I have conversations with, they want a cap. They want to cap it where it is. They don't want to move, they want to grow any more because they know how they're being impacted, okay? So, we're not at 500, at least the count's not there right now, right? I mean, it could be next month whenever Granicus updates their numbers, but I wouldn't set it in any more than 600 right now, for sure.
I agree.
No way.
I'll get on board for that.
And I'm gonna take some flack over that. I can tell you right now.
We're all gonna take flack no matter what.
I know, I'm just saying, right?
Yes.
Well, would
But-
would it be appropriate to go back and take the census count for housing units?
Bella Vista doesn't have that data available on US Census.
It's not available yet. The president hasn't signed off on the 2020
Are you
census.
kidding?
Well, we have certain amounts of, it's just that one has a giant X next to it.
Yeah.
That one specifically.
So what's
600.
wrong with the water meter count?
We don't,
Yeah.
we don't know the number because we don't run the water system. So
But they know how
And there's
many
other
there are.
water service providers.
It's a
Yeah,
definite
multiple
number.
water
Yeah, it's
service
fixed
For
providers.
water
Yeah, they
meters,
told us 15,000.
Yeah.
for residential water meters, well, then you got a number.
Yeah.
That's probably what
And
they're
you know
doing.
that's gonna be accurate.
All right.
There's a
Did
plus
you
or
want to talk
minus.
about how we might manage density? A sandwich rule or something along
Sandwich rule, if you got fewer, like cul-de-sacs, you've got so many of them, and you counted, how many, a bunch of them had 4,
Well, streets,
yeah, streets.
there's,
that
I
were-
know of a cul-de-sac that has 3,
Yeah.
and they're just right there. And there was another house for sale, so they're
Is
worried.
anybody surrounded in that? Because if you're 3 short-term rentals together, nobody's bothered by that.
So.
What's that?
Is anybody sandwiched by the short-term
Yeah, I
rentals?
He's right on the side of
somebody,
it. I mean,
yeah.
there's the 3 houses right there.
There's a lady in the audience sandwiched by 7. She's the only one left. And
Yeah,
her house is for sale because she, doesn't want to put up with
Right.
whatever.
Yeah,
She
and
said,
I don't blame her
She
for
lives
that.
by herself, there's nobody else close,
right.
and she's had problems with the ones next door, and she wasn't planning on leaving for years.
Am
But,
I correct?
It's been moved up, but like I said, she sits in the middle of 7
Yeah.
Rentals?
rentals, short-term, all on
but am I correct,
number 2
Larry?
T-box at Brittany.
As you think about density, it's not a matter of shutting down anybody who's operating a short-term rental today.
There would be
It's
an
a go
attrition that would
forward.
take place. One of
Those
them
are
would
townhomes,
be
right?
that their permit gets pulled.
Yeah.
Every
Correct.
one of
Yeah.
them. Small,
The other
2-bedrooms,
thing, you
flat lots kind of
you
thing.
could restrict it on
Number
transfers
2
of
T-box at
ownership.
Brittany.
Yeah,
They lose the permit, and they transfer ownership. In other words, you can't sell the property as a rental. You can own it as long as you want to, it'll still be there, but you can't sell it.
is there
that
a
way.
simple sandwich rule we could implement and then go forward with this
Right,
again
anything
before we get too bogged down in too many density rules?
Well, the only 2 rules that I wrote up was density shall not exceed 2 lodging units for every 10 consecutive existing or vacant future lots, because you might have another subdivision coming in. Not here today, we got lots of vacant land. So it'd be new created lots as well.
They have to be contiguous, I would assume.
It's a running thing, so you just go down the street and the lots may be wide on one side, they may be narrow on the other side, you count 10 lots or 14 lots, as one suggestion is, and so many of those, they might be side by side, they might sandwich somebody in, but in that running length as you go down the street. And so, and the GIS maps can easily take care of that for you.
Well, if that gets in, I'm a no, right off the bat.
And then the other one was that if the street had less than 6 lots, it would be no. And it doesn't prohibit them from being there today, it's just that we won't issue a new permit in that situation.
Let me just add this, because you have a lot of leeway in this area, and you can adopt regulations that have a rational basis. It is important for there to be some facts behind how you're pulling these numbers out. Why is it sandwiching a problem? There needs to be some stuff in the record. We need to put a whereas clause. What is it about that requires us to say you can't do it? Because if we don't have a good reason, we can't really articulate it, then we need to really look about whether we need to implement that regulation.
There's no way to do that.
I don't want to live between two of them.
Well, that house in your neighborhood may come in and it may not be an Airbnb, but it may not be somebody who wants to live in there either.
Oh, that's
You
true.
can have
You
two
definitely have,
undesirable
I hear you there, but I'm just saying, does anybody, come on, does anybody here, sitting here today, anywhere here, want to have an Airbnb on both sides
And
of
my
their
point would be that it should be
residence?
really easy to articulate why.
Huh?
It should be very easy to articulate
But
why.
we could. Look, I'm not advocating for it against right now, I'm just saying, does anybody? It's kind of like, to me, some things, we hold these truths to be self-evident. I didn't say that, but some things just make sense. Does it make any sense to put 17 people in a 3,200 square foot home, a
That's
single-family residential home? To me, no. Now, maybe somebody else could rationalize it, but I can't. Does anybody in here want to live in between two short-term rental properties?
I don't really care.
Everyday
Those are
property?
different
I do.
questions.
I don't care. They
I
behave
do.
themselves, it's their right to live any place they want.
I do, I care,
Buy them.
you know? Yeah, right. Sure, that's the answer.
I've got one on my street, Doug, and it's unoccupied probably half the time. And when it is occupied, it's small groups. It's not the Loch Lomond party house. So
Who said that?
Yeah, you did.
it was Ellen.
That's Ellen.
What about townhomes?
But those, it's the townhomes that you're talking about, right? Where the lady's trapped?
Mm-hmm. She's moving 6 or 7 years earlier than planned.
So are our regulations going to apply to townhomes?
Any home that's in the city, sure. It's a rooftop.
But the issue is
The ordinance
today,
says,
when you
everybody,
adopt the
let's go back.
Let's
It
hear it.
applies to short-term rentals. Short-term rentals means a residential dwelling unit, portion of a dwelling unit, or bedroom within a dwelling unit, leased or rented to guests for a period of less than 30 consecutive days.
Okay.
And then elsewhere, we've limited, well, some drafts have limited to say that it doesn't apply to owner occupied, but that's not across the board. So that's what it applies to. So if it fits within that definition, it applies.
So the Townhome Association guidelines or regulations that they have pertaining to that particular,
They don't have any,
some of them do.
not for occupancy and what they
Not
do
for
in them.
occupancy.
Not for what they do in them.
DOA doesn't, ACC doesn't.
No, I don't, the Townhome Association doesn't have, I mean, they've got guidelines, they're supposed to have guidelines pertaining to the landscaping and the
Yes, they get
maintenance,
that.
and the maintenance of the maintenance of the facility. And that's something I've heard from a lot of people that live in the townhomes, is that the people that are buying the townhomes for short-term rentals make no effort to maintain them. They're just strictly buying them for the income stream, that's it. They're not gonna put any money into them, and it's, I keep telling them that, hey, that's a townhome association issue, not something that we can
Could be.
deal with, but, you know, can be. I mean, there's not anything there for us to deal with, is it?
No.
What, you mean as far as requiring them to fix up the townhome? Or to make repairs, or what?
Anything pertaining to the maintenance of that townhome. I mean, if we got a structure out here that, that's in disrepair, I mean, it's, you know, obviously it's not in disrepair. then we got guidelines to deal with that. No, we don't have guidelines to deal with it, so it can just collapse around itself and it's not
Yes,
anything.
we absolutely do
No.
have the ability to build unsafe buildings.
No matter where
And
they
to
are.
notice the owner and to condemn it, whether it's a townhome or residential structure or commercial structure. We absolutely have.
He
the
said
authority to do that.
disrepair, he didn't say unsafe.
He said falling in.
Yeah, so there's a big difference
Big
between
difference in
falling
size.
down
That's true.
and
Needing
disrepair.
Right, one may need paint terribly and
The other
still
one
good,
is-
you know.
Yeah, and when the stuff unsuits us, maybe you weren't all here.
Well, I heard about one that the fireplace was not working, so the owner put some type of a cap on top of the fireplace, on top of the chimney. Didn't do anything to prevent it from starting a fire in the fireplace, but put some kind of a cap of some type of piece of metal or something on top of the chimney so that it, no smoke can get out.
And you're
of it.
trying to say he never told the renters don't start a fire?
I don't, to my knowledge, that's.
Or
what-
fool him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you get smoke in the house really quick.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, so I think,
I think we've addressed.
Yeah, 600 or so?
right.
So do we like the no sandwich rule or not? I think we should keep it in play, at least
I
think
do.
about
Me
it.
too.
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
initially, you're gonna have to do it by attrition,
So,
you'll have to license both of them.
I mean, I don't know what consensus of how everybody on the balance of council would like to handle this. What we could do, because this group of folks over here, myself and Jason have sat down and we've gone through point by point a couple times and written this through. I think probably if it's okay, we'll do that same thing. We'll put one back together again from the points that we talked about today. And then we'll bring it forward and maybe have one more conversation before a work session.
Yep.
And don't wait for a work session. I mean, that's really kind of, because you got other things on the agenda as well.
Well,
We
let's
could
let's
scrub
make an
up-
effort if we do that, to have it in the evening, just to satisfy
That's
half of
fine.
the gallery.
That's
Yeah.
fine. So, that's what we'll do. Now, I'll tell you, I may not be available this week because we've got plans for going out of town Thursday. But we could, Jason,
And
what's good for
I'm gone
you?
next week.
All next week?
I'm
We got-
starting Friday and all next
We
week.
got
Okay,
19
well, we
days
got the
before
week
next
after that.
Yeah, we got 19 days
got
for the
the
next
week.
work session.
And we could kind of sit down and do a rough draft, and then bring Jason
Yeah,
in,
you
try to
should
cover
ta-
everything.
take a
off.
little time to write it up anyway.
Yeah, just to make
Yeah.
the.
I want to be involved in the writing.
Yeah, for sure.
Doug, do we want to kind of recap what are some
Don't
of
start
those?
writing it without me.
What are some of the things that are up in the area? Like, I don't know, did we ever settle on the septic inspection versus the maximum capacities?
That should be dealt with elsewhere in a different code, not here. I mean,
So therefore, we would have maximum occupancy based on septic capacities?
On the legitimate
The two-
count,
the
as
two
as
per
Mr. Murphy
bedroom.
pointed
Yeah,
out.
we'll do what Richard said.
There are three per bedroom.
I thought it was gonna be based on the fire code. Fire code,
Well,
says
there's
maximum
two
Well, that was
two
for
standards.
sewer.
You got
He
two
was talking
standards.
about sewer when he said that, about the one person per 200 feet or whatever.
That's an occupancy or density standard for the.
Yeah.
I'm understanding that we don't, correct me if I'm wrong, we don't want to go down the road of septic inspection or in any way on this, but we potentially want to look at septic issues citywide related to multiple uses in general, and it obviously would apply to that at some point in the future.
Is that what I understood? That's
No.
not what I understood either.
Well,
Okay.
because you're looking for a septic inspection.
Yes, I thought we agreed that it's going to be like every 2
Well,
years.
you could talk about the initial pumping of the tank, which would have some partial inspection.
I like the inspection idea, but I like it in place of occupancy limits.
And
That
inspection
if
is
you
not the
bring
same
your
as pumping.
inspection and show you've got a
So
healthy
no
septic.
occupancy limits at all?
Not if you have a healthy septic
Oh, no,
system.
no, I'd never buy into that.
So you can put 17 people in a...
That violates their septic permit,
Yeah, it violates the permit, period.
people per bedroom.
All right, then it has to stay there. I wouldn't do both. I don't know why you do both.
what's wrong with the fire code standard? There's so many people.
Well, you have both of those codes. One has to do with the size of your building. If you got a 3,600 square foot house with 2 bedrooms in it, that means you only got 6 people that you can have in there. Well, actually, with that size of house, you can have 18 in there by the fire code.
Yes, if we're going to limit their occupancy, and it sounds like that's where this is headed. We're going to limit their occupancy. Let them be the responsible party for their septic system. It's their cost, it's their problem if it does in fact.
We need to regulate that on a different,
If we're going to regulate that, let's regulate it for everybody.
yeah, elsewhere.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
Build it universally and then put a section that covers this. Because it can stand alone, and because we can just incorporate it into this one. Then we can cover both.
Bring them in.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask my question again. Doug, do you want to have septic inspection requirement in yours, and then if that's what you want to propose? Because we're talking about your proposal at this point, and they can offer amendments to take it out.
I'll probably include it in there, yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll
And
keep
then
it-
if you want to
I'll
take
keep
it out, you know, we can make amendments
debate
to
it.
that. What's that?
We can debate it.
Yeah.
See what we got, see, put on paper what we've actually got today.
Yep.
And then look at it and then either add to, subtract, pick it apart, whatever we're gonna do with it.
I mean, it's a few adjustments, it's really not too bad.
I want to add something to what I said. I'm not implying that there is not some rational, good faith basis for regulating sandwiching, but we need to articulate.
Yeah.
It has to be more than, nobody would like that. It's got to be specific. So we need to be able to say it negatively impacts quality of life. It negatively impacts interpersonal relationships between neighbors because they no longer exist. We find this to be detrimental to the health, welfare, and general, that's the kind of stuff we need to be able to say in order to justify
And then
some
prove
of
it.
this stuff, okay?
Sounds
And I'm
good.
more than willing to help you say that, but we've got to say it, and I don't want to, so if we're going to go down that road, we need to be thinking and articulating a good rationale for any of these things.
Well, it sounds
Because
like you're-
it's very likely someone's liable to challenge us, and so I want to make sure we're protected as much as possible.
Do we have provisions in the draft now that allow us to pull the permit for violations?
If they are convicted at a court, so the court could pull it if they are convicted of violations after, on the third violation.
I'm saying, we as a city.
No, not just willy-nilly, because they've got a constitutional right to due process.
Well, I understand that.
So we've got to be able to have some mechanism by which they would have a right to be heard if we were going to pull that permit.
But-
So what we did was we built that in. We'd say, look, we're going to cite you for violating. We cited you again. We're going to give it to court. You get cited again, the judge convicts you the third time. By law, by this law, if we adopted, the judge would pull the permit, and they've had due process.
So you're gonna be gone next week?
Yes, sir.
Do we have your cell number?
I'm on vacation. I really tried wondering, y'all are very generous in my vacation, and I generally only try to take one because it conflicts with all my court dates, all counsel, all everything. So I'm trying to take a week off. I apologize, but I'm probably going
We'll
to
catch you when you
be a
get
little
You had a
incommunicado.
question a while ago with me that you wanted to get started. You want to finish it?
Jared,
No.
Let's take it offline.
Yeah, go outside in the parking lot and duke it out.
Hey,
No, don't do that
Wait a minute,
because.
hold on.
We're going back.
Jared, I'm not gonna.
Going back and forth.
Hey, that's all right. I sat and listened to a 15-minute showboat speech with him one night.
Have a nice day. Have a good weekend. Thank you.
Yeah.
We're actually starting to agree, that's fair. Because we'll both be together next year.
Jerry, the two of you guys settle it out between yourselves.
Paint shop, neither one of them worked. Nope, nope. It's going downhill. Here's the back. And neither one of them worked. Now I'm waiting on an orthopedic surgeon to tell me what I've done.